Chapter 601. The next day was sunny. The vast and distant sky was as blue as the vast and distant sea. Wisps of white clouds floated in the sky, and the sea breeze became gentle. Strangely, it seemed that the further east they went, the warmer it was. When the people on the two ships set out, it was bitterly cold on the shore. But now they could take off their clothes and go out on the deck to bask in the sun. There were more than 200 people on the big ship, and many of them knew how to work with wood. Li Shaoxian found a carpenter early in the morning and asked him to make a chair for him. There were ready-made wood on the ship, and he paid a good price and was popular. Naturally, work was done quickly. Therefore at noon he was half lying in the bow of the boat. Actually, he was making a beach chair. He put a small stool next to the chair and put tea and food on the stool. The wind was calm, the ship was big, and the water was deep. So at this time, it was almost no different from flat ground. The sun was shining and the sea breeze was blowing. It was a very comfortable environment. Some people were fishing by the side of the ship, not caring if they could catch anything. Some people were casting nets at the stern. This ship used to be a pirate ship, but pirates often worked as fishermen, so it could be a warship or a fishing boat. There was also a group of people around Li Shaoxian talking to him. Actually, he wanted to find a god to ask him about his luck. But the god also had a temper. He said he was too tired and didn't want to see anything today. But although he didn't look at fate, his words were interesting. When he was excited, he would make an exception. Anyway, this group of people had nothing to do, and talking to him was a relief. The merchant Wu Jiasong also came up with his wife, but his wife didn't get out of bed and broke her hand last night. She didn't look good. She and Wu Jiasong stood by the side of the ship, looking over but didn't come over. Wu Jiasong seemed very happy. Although his wife's hand was like cutting out his heart, he was happy that he didn't have to mingle with those idlers. It was like drinking hot water alone, hot and comfortable. When he was happy, he became generous. She stopped the peddler who was selling snacks on the deck. She picked up a few of the snacks and wrapped them in her clothes. She teased her wife to eat them one by one. Pan He frowned and took a bite of everything. She said that she was not feeling well and did not eat any more. Wu Jiasong pitifully ate the rest, not even sparing the dregs between his fingers. Even if Pan He had something on her mind, she still frowned when she saw him like this. But in the end, there was no other way. It had been like this for more than 10 years. There were people around Li Yunxin who knew about Wu Jiasong. Seeing him like this, he decided to bring his story to Li Shaoxian, hoping that he would be happy enough to let him have a look. He used to have a big business. Didn't he have any assets under his name? Gambling houses, restaurants, inns, there were even 2 copper mines. 10 years ago, I still ran with him on the road to the capital, ate and slept together. He was lucky enough to climb up to a high branch in the capital. Just like that, he became rich. The one who spoke was also a peddler. From the looks of it, he was just a peddler. He must have been very unsuccessful. But now, because he was once familiar with Wu Jiasong, he was proud. He said in an unconcerned tone, "Unfortunately, he failed in a few years. That official in the capital fell, and he didn't have a good time either. The money he earned for 4 or 5 years was all spent. His previous property was also gone." With that, he returned to our Stormy Waves Road. I started from the beginning. That's how I ended up with this problem. When the money is in my hands, I always feel that it doesn't belong to me. I try to save as much as I can. I don't know where he hid it. That little wife of his, he bought it when he went back to the Bien. I was in the Bien at that time. I also invited him to drink twice. And the result? He became rich again and forgot about me. Sigh, rich people are busy and forgetful. When he said this, a group of people laughed and jeered, asking him to talk to Wu Jiasong. Otherwise they wouldn't believe that they knew each other. Li Yunxin also laughed with the group, but he was thinking about something else. It was the same as before. This peddler mentioned Wu Jiasong's background in front of Li Yunxin, thinking that he remembered it himself and said it casually. But in fact, it was Li Yunxin who asked him to say it. He himself didn't notice the subtle guidance and hints. Because although Pan He was useless, since he could be in charge of a country in this new Freemasonry, he should have had some weight in the past. Such a person lurking around Wu Jiasong for so many years. For what? It was possible that he was just using his money and connections to inquire. Or he might have a more direct purpose. But after listening to this group of people talk for so long, Li Yunxin felt that the latter was not very likely. He let out a light breath, picked up the teacup beside him and took a sip, then said casually, "Strange. The further east we go, the warmer it gets." The peddler just now was anxious to get away from the teasing of the crowd, and immediately said, "Young Master Li, is this the first time you went east?" Young Master Li coughed. "Yes. I used to go west with my father. It wasn't because my father was willing to go. My father has a relative in the Tocharian kingdom in the west. He's my distant uncle. Sai, he forced us to go there to play. Actually, there's nothing fun in the west. Barbarian land. But there's no way my uncle is a third-rank official in the Tocharian kingdom. Everyone knew that this was the first time young Master Li went out to sea in the east. After so many days, they had already understood this young master's temper. If he was good at something and experienced something, he would not be stingy to show it to others. If someone mentioned something he didn't know or experienced, he would immediately change the topic and start to brag about how he used to be with his father. But he was a young man after all, and he did have some ability, so they didn't hate him. Seeing him like this now, they could only laugh in their hearts. But they still said, yes, yes. After all, the east is a little different from the west. Young Master Li knows that in about a day or two, we will reach the chain of the East Sea. After saying these 3 words, he saw Li Yunxin's face show a little doubt, so he smiled. The chain of the East Sea refers to the islands in the East Sea. It's considered the border that our East Sea country can manage. There are nearly 100 islands of various sizes. This time, our merchant group is going there. He then lowered his voice. I heard that the owner of the ship, Boss Lu, wants to go further east in the chain of the East Sea, to find the Dragon Island. After we disembark, they still have to continue to the east. When he said this, someone seemed to not like him showing off like this, so he sneered, in a day or two. Brother Wang, I'm afraid you've forgotten about Aquarius Bay and that Sea King Lu Fei. When these words came out, the people who were talking and laughing just now were stunned for a moment, and all of them quieted down at the same time. It was said that the sea bandit Lu Fei's lair, Aquarius Bay, was between the chain of the East Sea and the mainland. If they were unlucky, they might really encounter it. These people also knew about it. These 2 ships used to be Lu Fei's ships. Chapter 602. This kind of thing was bad luck. Many people on the sea were superstitious, so after a moment of silence, they all spat and scolded that person for being a jinx. They quickly changed the topic and let it go. But after chatting for a while, they were eventually bored by that person, and they slowly went their separate ways. The person who was showing off to Li Yunxin was about to leave, but he was pulled back by Li Yunxin. Hey? Where are you going? You haven't told me. Why is it warmer the further east we go, the warmer it is? This person was like young Master Li, after all, and he really liked to show off. He was about to leave. Hearing this question, he raised his eyebrows and squatted down again. A reserved smile appeared on his face. Young Master Li is proficient in metaphysics, but you don't know this. Oh, that's easy. Young Master, think about it. Heaven and earth, Qian, Kuan, Yin and Yang, they all have differences, right? Our land is Kuan, heavy and nourishing all things, which is pure Yin and Yang. But the land is heavy and the sea is the opposite. It is like the sky and should be Yang. Since one is Yin and the other is Yang, there must be differences. So in winter it is cold on the land and warm in the water. The further east we go, the more water there is and the warmer it is. This world was different from Li Yunxin's previous world. In his previous world, there were also theories like Yin and Yang and 5 elements, but it had always been outside the mainstream scientific system. There were very few people who believed in it. Even those who often talked about it were only saying it casually. In his previous world, the theory of Yin and Yang and 5 elements could solve some problems, but most problems could not be solved or could not be solved for the time being. But here, the way of Yin and Yang seemed to be the mainstream. This peddler used Yin and Yang to explain the difference between land and sea. At first glance, it sounded reasonable and it also matched the actual situation. But the problem was that the water under Li Yunxin was also water in his previous world. He knew that there was another way to explain it. The specific heat capacity of water was higher. In winter, the temperature along the coast was slightly higher, but it couldn't be so high. But it could not have been so high. They had gone straight to the east and there was a compass on the boat. The latitude didn't change, but the longitude did. Logically, the temperature should have risen slightly, but it shouldn't have been so obvious. After nearly 10 days at sea, the temperature had risen by at least 10 degrees. At this point, it was already above 0. As he thought of this, he heard the merchant laugh again. I heard that if you go further east, it'll be like summer. It was a vast and boundless fog and he couldn't see the front anymore. If we pass through that fog, we will arrive at the edge of the sky, the residences of the celestial emperors. In other words, the Dragon Island and the Immortal Mountain are both in the fog, he asked. The merchant smiled. That's right. The immortals are separated from us by the fog. Without great magic power, you won't be able to pass through. At this point he waved his hand. Li Yunxin nodded. Goddess Penglai was sucked into the talisman. Over the past few days, he often interrogated her in the dead of night. The demon said some things in bits and pieces, but Li Yunxin did not know if they were true or false. So these days he casually asked the people on the ship like before, confirming Goddess Penglai's words. This time it was printed. The demon previously said that Mount Penglai was in the thick fog, so they couldn't tell the direction. She also said that the Dragon Island was also in the thick fog, appearing and disappearing from time to time. She also said that the 4 seasons were like early summer, and the further east, the hotter it was. Li Yunxin felt it was absurd, so he asked this question. He didn't expect the demon to be telling the truth. This was very strange. While they were talking, they suddenly heard the people at the side and the stern of the ship making noise. The people at the side of the ship were fishing, and the people at the stern were releasing the nets. It was originally a happy scene. But now, they were hurriedly retrieving the fishing gear, as if something terrible had happened in the sea. Li Yunxin also stood up. Seeing that the merchant was stunned, he whispered, "Could it be the Sealine?" When he said this, there was some kind of blank fear in his tone. It was the first time he saw him like this. Li Yunxin frowned. "What Sealine?" The merchant ignored him. After being stunned for a while, he suddenly turned around and ran into the cabin, not even in the mood to show off. He could only walk to the side of the ship and look down. Sure enough, he saw the Sealine that the merchant mentioned. This name was very appropriate. In the dark blue sea there was a line. It looked about the thickness of a person's forearm, and it was extremely long. Next to the side of the ship, it extended from the bow to the stern. Li Yunxin's eyesight was better than the people on the ship. Therefore he could see it very clearly. This thing looked white, but in fact it should be translucent. It was about 1 or 2 feet under the water, so it could be considered floating. But it was just floating, it really looked like a line. He didn't notice anything unusual about this thing. According to his thinking, it should be some kind of unknown sea creature. It should be a plant since it could grow so long. However, there must be a reason for the people on the ship to panic like this. He only looked at the side of the ship for a few seconds and someone behind him said, "Young Master Li, don't look, this thing is highly poisonous. Don't get splashed by the waves." For a moment, Li Yunxin didn't understand the connection between the poison and the waves. But soon he understood. He wasn't the only one on the ship who was at sea for the first time. A dozen steps away there were 2 men also looking down from the side of the ship. They looked like scholars, but their eyesight wasn't very good. Plus, the ship was very tall, so they tried their best to get down. It was useless, it was just a psychological comfort. But they weren't familiar with the people on the ship, so no one stopped them. At this moment, the Sealine on the side of the ship slightly trembled. This slightly was relative to the length of the thing. With Li Yunxin's eyesight, he couldn't see how long it was from the bow to the stern, so it must be terrifyingly long. For such a long thing, even if it trembled in a very small way, the force was still very strong. Boom. It was as if hundreds of thousands of them had rushed up from the bottom of the water, and the side of the ship splashed high. This wave was not enough to cross the side of the ship and hit the first class. But some of the water splashed on people. Someone shouted at Li Yunxin, but he didn't touch him. The 2 scholars on the side of the ship, however, had their faces splashed. The seawater was bitter and astringent, and it seemed to hurt their eyes. The 2 hurriedly shrank back, turned their heads and raised their hands to wipe their faces with their sleeves. At this moment they heard a few people who were slightly closer almost at the same time say, "Don't move, don't wipe, don't touch, Aya." But it was too late. They just raised their hands and wiped. It was like changing faces in a play. The 2 people's faces were blurred. It was as if the 2 people's faces were made of sugar paste, and now the heat was gone and it melted. The skin on their faces drooped, and their eyelids drooped, looking extremely terrifying. Seeing the 2 of them like this, the people around them gasped. The 2 people didn't seem to notice the abnormality on their faces at all, and even made a strange "ha" sound, because their eyelids drooped, and their vision was a little blurred. They thought there was a problem with the seawater entering their eyes, so they wiped again. At this moment, 2 bloodied faces fell onto the deck with 2 clattering sounds. The 2 people's faces were wiped off just like that. Their bloody facial bones and 2 bloody eyeballs were exposed. Everyone finally cried out in fear. With such a cry, the 4 eyeballs lost their support and drooped down. The 2 scholars didn't seem to feel the pain, but they also felt that something was wrong and reached out to touch their faces. At this time they could no longer see. With one touch they touched their own facial bones and their own eyeballs. After a moment of shock, they immediately let out a high-pitched scream, and fell to the ground with a thud. Blood gushed out, quickly covering their entire faces, and then gathered into a puddle on the deck. One of them was so frightened that he lost his mind. He turned around and grabbed the side of the ship, flipped over and fell into the sea. Usually, when a wound was soaked in salt water, the pain was excruciating, not to mention his face in the sea. Immediately he let out a scalp-numbing scream, but it only lasted for a moment before it stopped. The seawater only splashed a few drops on his face, and it melted, not to mention that his whole body was submerged in the sea. The remaining scholar rolled on the ground. Everyone avoided him for fear of being splashed by his blood. With this commotion, a few officers and soldiers ran out of the cabin. Seeing this person, they were shocked and asked, "What's going on?" Xie Sheng, who had stayed in the cabin for a few days, also walked out. This was the first time Li Yunxin saw him after they parted in the mountain village. Li Yunxin could sense this person's aura in the cabin, but he didn't see his face. Now that he looked at him, he realized that his appearance had changed. Although his skin was still slightly dark, it was slightly whiter. He seemed to have grown a bit and his shoulders were wider. He had stayed in the mountains for more than 10 years, so his skin was dark and rough. It was fine to say that his appearance was average, but it wasn't too much to say that he was ugly. But now he had completely gotten rid of the evaluation of being ugly, because his realm had increased. Looking at his aura, he should be in the emptiness realm. Once in the emptiness realm, a person would be reborn. In the past, Lu Gongzan looked like Lao Dao with gray hair at his temples. But after entering the emptiness realm, his hair and beard turned black again, because he had a longer lifespan and regained his youth. Xie Sheng was naturally young, so his body became strong. It was hard for a person with a good figure to not look good. Coupled with the well-tailored clothes he was wearing, he could be considered a talented person. This guy did look like a main character. Once he escaped from the mountain that had confined him for more than 10 years, he immediately caused a lot of trouble. When he first entered the world, he had nothing. Now he became a guest of the governor of the Stormy Waves Road of the East Sea Nation, and he also kidnapped 100 soldiers and 2 huge warships. At the same time, he also relied on the shallow cultivation method that Li Yunxin gave him to cultivate to such a level in just a dozen days. This kind of talent and cultivation was really terrifying. But the spiritual qi in the world was already chaotic. Naturally, Xie Sheng couldn't cultivate like the previous cultivators. He must have had the help of spiritual medicine. Li Yunxin guessed that the reason he went to the governor's office to play tricks was because there were spiritual items in the governor's office. This wasn't strange. All the officials and nobles in the secular world would have some treasures hidden in their homes. In the past, Daotong and Kenzo had residences in every major city, so it wasn't strange for them to befriend each other. But now, maybe this Xie Sheng had used up all of his spiritual items and wanted to improve, so he wanted to see if there was anything on Dragon Island that he could cultivate with. When he walked out, he looked calm and steady. When the soldiers saw him, they hurriedly saluted and lowered their voices. Li Yunxin could see that the soldiers respected this Daoist Xie from the bottom of their hearts. This kid was really good at winning people's hearts. So he asked what was going on. Seeing that this young Daoist Xie Sheng had a kind attitude, someone told him. Xie Sheng understood immediately, but he didn't go to the side of the ship first. Instead, he looked at the scholar who was rolling on the ground, his face full of pity. Why didn't anyone save him? Just leave him like this? The sailors explained that this kind of person's blood was also poisonous. The Selene's poison was terrifying. Once it appeared in the sea, the surrounding tens of miles of sea would have this kind of poison. Just a little bit of it would cause the flesh and blood to melt. If anyone else touched the blood of the poisoned person, they would end up the same. It had to be after the Selene disappears, and after 6 to 8 hours, this kind of strange poison would also disappear. This thing wasn't common, but it wasn't rare either. If a person traveled 10 or so times a year, they would definitely see it once. As long as they didn't disturb it, it would be fine as long as they stayed far away. Who asked these 2 scholars to court death? What could other people do? Xie Sheng heard this, frowned and thought for a while. He sighed softly. Even so, letting him suffer like this isn't a solution. He stretched his hand to the side. Give me the knife. After the bodyguard boarded the ship, he took off his armor and only wore cloth armor. He didn't bring his long knife, only a short knife. He hurriedly took out the short knife from his waist and gave it to Xie Sheng. Xie Sheng held the knife and looked at the scholar who was rolling on the ground. He couldn't bear it anymore and sighed twice before saying, "Help him free." As soon as he finished speaking, he waved his hand and a short knife shot out with a buzzing sound. It went right into the scholar's forehead and nailed his head to the ground. This person's body twitched and twitched a few times, then he stopped moving. Everyone was shocked by his decisive action and quietened down. Xiexing walked out of the crowd with his hands behind his back and sighed again. What a bitter life. He waved his sleeves, a whirlwind swept the corpse and the blood on the deck into the sea, leaving not a single trace on the ship. Everyone saw this scene and naturally felt that it was miraculous. They had long heard that there was a Taoist priest on the ship who went out to sea to search for the Celestial Mountain and Dragon Island. Now that they saw this, they knew that he was indeed a deity. Thus, no one surrounded Li Yunxin anymore. They all went to talk to this deity. Compared to little deity Li, this deity was the real deal. Li Yunxin took advantage of the time when the group of people surrounded deity Xie to walk to the side of the ship and carefully looked into the sea. He quietly took a few steps back. Leaning against the side of the ship, he stretched out a finger and gently wiped it. He put it into his mouth and slowly sucked for a while coldly looking at Xiexing and the group of people. People couldn't see small and fast things, but he could. The scholar was rolling on the ground. Although he was far away, a drop of blood still splashed further and landed on the side of the ship. He tasted this thing and then turned his head to look into the sea. He didn't know when the sealing had disappeared. It seemed to have gone back into the deep waters. Chapter 603. He took 2 steps back to avoid the crowd. But just as he turned to the front of the ship, he made a soft hiss sound. There was some itchiness in his mouth. This feeling was both familiar and strange, making him startled for a moment. In his previous life he didn't eat well. It was considered a blessing to be able to eat for a certain period of time, but he couldn't pursue balanced nutrition. Thus, mouth ulcers were common, and his grandfather said it was because of internal heat. When the season changed, or if he was lucky enough to eat some fried food, he would feel his mouth and throat were slightly dry and itchy the next day. After another day it would hurt a little. The next 2 or 3 days would be the process of the pain and itch reaching its peak, and it would take another 4 or 5 days to recover. Although he was smart when he was young, he had limited access to knowledge. He believed his grandfather's words, thinking that it was because of the season changed, or because it was hot or cold. When he grew up, he learned more and knew that eating fried food would cause internal heat and pain, or eating too many oranges would cause internal heat and pain. Perhaps it was because the surface of the fried food was hard. It was crispy when eaten, but eating too much would cause damage to the oral mucosa. If the injury was severe, there would be ulcers. The same was true for oranges. Too much acid would stimulate the mucosa, and it would also cause damage. However, this kind of thing was quite controversial even in his previous world. The reason why he was startled today was because he had been cultivating since he was young, and his body was strong, and he paid attention to diet and health. Thus, he had almost never experienced the taste of ulcers. Now that he had the body of dragons, he would not have such small injuries. Thus, now that he felt a familiar feeling in his mouth, many of the past hidden deep in his heart would come out, making him feel inexplicably complicated. There were very few people like him who had lived 2 lives. There were even fewer people like him who had lived a thrilling and magnificent life. On such a strange ocean he experienced the emotions of his previous life in an unexpected way. It was also a wonderful thing. But the problem was, the poison in this drop of blood could actually sting his mouth. He ate Panhe's grenade. Apart from feeling a little choking, he felt fine. It was like drinking hard liquor in his previous life, and when the liquor entered his stomach would warm up. But now he was hurt by this thing. The poison was really incredible. Li Yunxin stood there with a slight frown. He smacked his lips as if he was tasting a fine wine, and felt that the pain seemed to have lessened a little. This was probably all the poison could do. But at this moment he felt someone looking at him. So he looked up. Lu Baishui was on the 2nd floor of the ship. When he saw him, he smiled and said, "Young Master Li, I heard that you can predict fortune and misfortune. Come up and calculate for me. What do you think?" She was looking for him for something. He looked at Xiexing. All right. There were more than 200 people on the ship and it was a mess. There were quite a number of people coming and going on the deck. He would not attract any attention if he went up. There was only one person to pay attention to. It was Panhe. Panhe's memory of last night was erased by the pheasant. She must feel strange. A perfectly fine person's wrist was broken, but she couldn't remember what happened. She must feel something was wrong. He didn't know what kind of spiritual medicine she had, but she didn't seem to feel much pain even after applying a thick layer of it on her wrist. Wherever Li Yunxin went, her gaze followed him from afar. But he didn't care. He went straight to the 2nd floor, stood by the railing with Lu Baishui and looked down. Xiexing was giving orders to several guards. Those sergeants listened and nodded repeatedly. A group of people surrounded him in awe. listening to his words as if they were listening to celestial music. If it were me, I would also kill them. Lu Baishui looked at Xie Sheng and others and said in a low voice, if they can't be saved, they will suffer for nothing. When I was in Jianghu, I often encountered such things. Sometimes they were good brothers who went through life and death together. But something happened and there was nothing I could do. I could only bear the pain and cut my wrist. Brotherly, don't you think so? Li Yunxin looked at him strangely. Brother Lu, why do you suddenly say this? Lu Baishui turned his eyes to the sea. There was another ship in the distance. The visibility was good today and people on the deck of the Haitsong could see it clearly. The Haitsong was full of supplies for their eastward journey, and it had been sailing on the starboard side of the Haitsong. Usually they use small boats and speedboats to communicate on the sea. Because we will reach the chain of the East Sea in a day or two. Lu Baishui narrowed his eyes. After unloading the goods and people in the chain of the East Sea and resupplying, Brotherly will go further east. Alas, the sea is not peaceful. For example, today is a beautiful day and someone suddenly died. I don't know how many things will happen in the future. Li Yunxin furrowed her brows even more tightly. There was a hidden meaning in Lu Baishui's words, and only a fool couldn't understand it. It would be boring to pretend to be calm. He said, Brother Lu, what do you want to say? Lu Baishui looked at the sea and was silent for a while, then turned to look at him. His expression was very solemn. A few days ago, Brotherly said that you would disguise yourself and go down to investigate Taoist Xie's movements. Now, how is the investigation going? Li Yunxin thought for a while and looked at him. She looked back at him and said, I found someone suspicious. In my heart I also had some plans. Brother Lu, do you want to hear it? Which one? Li Yunxin stretched out his hand and pointed at Pan He, this woman. Pan He had been observing him in the dark. But now he was pointing at her. She was shocked for a moment. After a while, she hurriedly lowered her head, pretending that nothing had happened, and hurriedly walked away. Wu Jiasong didn't seem to know what was going on, so he chased after her. Lu Baishui was slightly stunned. It was as if he thought that Li Yunxin was pointing at someone else. But now he was pointing at Pan He, so he couldn't help but be surprised. Li Yunxin asked, Brother Lu, did you find anything? Lu Baishui was silent for a while, then sighed heavily, okay. Now that things have come to this. Brotherly, I won't hide it from you. I want to do something. Li Yunxin said with a smile, Brother Lu, please say it. I want to get rid of Taoist Xie and his 100 bodyguards. Lu Baishui stared at Li Yunxin with bright eyes. Brotherly is also a cultivator. If you have a conflict with him, can you protect yourself? Li Yunxin thought for a while. I can try. I can only protect myself. But why do you want to do it now? Lu Baishui let out a sigh, because we are almost at the East Sea chain. After saying this, he turned around. He put his hands on the railing and patted it. I gathered these people on board, so I naturally arranged my own spies. Brotherly, you know that these people are not good people. I am afraid that something will happen, so I can only do this. These days, I know one thing. Taoist Xie's people are going to do it, on the day when we arrive at the East Sea chain. When we arrive there, as soon as our two ships stop, they will attack from both sides with the local government and take down the two ships. After all, we are overseas. Because of my identity, they may not be able to do it in the inland. But when we are overseas, it is easy to kill them. If I die in the East Sea chain, it will only be a shipwreck. These are the news that my people have given me these days. I originally thought that Taoist Xie would not cause any trouble and let them stay on the ship. But since they have such an idea, I can't just sit and wait for death. I can only fight to the death. Li Yunxin softly said, oh, as if he was a little disappointed. After thinking for a while, he said, Brother Lu, if you have such an idea, the government must be prepared. If they are well-trained soldiers, I am afraid that even 200 people on the ship are no match for them. Brother Lu, what do you plan to do? Lu Baishui said in a low voice, of course I have my ways. What? Brother Li, after saying this, he wanted to say something but stopped. After hesitating for 2 or 3 breaths, he seemed to have finally made up his mind. Brother Li? Just like how you hid something from me, I also have something to hide from you. Based on our identities and positions, we should not be friends. But fate makes fools of people. I actually think that we are congenial and can be friends. Actually, I am. Saying this, he did not continue. He patted the railing hard. Hey. Anyway, I will not harm you. Li Yunxin was silent for a while, finally shook his head and smiled. If that is the case, if Brother Lu did not say it, I would pretend not to know. But now that I have said it, how can I pretend not to know? Brother Lu." As he said this, he suddenly heard the people below the ship and on the deck making noise again. Suspecting that the ceiling had appeared again, he looked up. But he found that the height song had become shorter. This was his first impression. Looking closely, he found that it was not shorter, but had changed direction. The height song was on the right side of the height song. At this time, the height song had changed direction and was heading straight for the height song. Both of them were huge ships. In order to avoid disturbances in the water, they were far away from each other. Today the sky was clear and the people on the deck could be seen clearly. A few days ago there was some fog on the sea, so they could only see the outlines. But although the distance was far, if the height song were to come here at full speed, it would only take a little more than a quarter of an hour for the two ships to touch each other. This kind of three-masted ship sailed mainly by the sea wind. But there were oars, two huge blades sticking out from the stern, 3 on each side. Usually they were kept in the belly of the ship, and only put down when manpower was needed. Each blade was driven by 10 people. Human power was transmitted to the blades through a complex gear structure, pushing the ship forward. But they could only play a supporting role. This was so that if they were unlucky and encountered a sea where there was no wind for several days, they could slowly row out of the ship. Now, the 6 blades at the stern of the height song had been put down, and they were flying up and down with all their might to make the ship move faster. When the people on the deck of the height song saw the height song coming this way, they started to clamor, wondering what it was doing and whether it was going to deliver something. But after being noisy for a while, they all realized one thing. If the height song and the height song did not turn and maintain their current speed, in the end, the height song would crash into the belly of the height song. It was unbearable for 2 fishing boats to collide like this, let alone 2 huge ships. They were once pirate warships and they had a collision angle. What was worse was that the ceiling had just disappeared. This meant that for at least 4 hours, the seawater in this area would be terrifyingly poisonous. If the height song hit the ship and it flooded, there would be no way to repair it. They could only watch as the water accumulated or abandon the ship to escape. However, abandoning the ship would also mean boarding the small ship. The small ship would be tossed about in the seawater, and it would definitely be splashed with the poisonous water. It would still be a dead end. Realizing this, the people on the deck immediately panicked. Even Xie Xing's face became solemn. Although the speed of his cultivation could be described as 1,000 miles a day, he was still just an emptiness realm expert. Only when he reached the transcendent realm could he fly, and he couldn't do it for long. If the ship sank, he could only try to kill the height song. With his current strength, he could suppress the rebellion on the height song. However, he only had 1 life. If the poisonous water splashed on the ship, he would die here. Li Yunxin turned to Lu Baishui and asked, "Is this your idea?" Lu Baishui stared at Xie Xing and his bodyguards and sighed, "Brother Li is right. 100 soldiers are hard to deal with. Therefore we have to make them panic first." The ceiling appeared at the right time. Now that they are panicking and their attention is on the height song, we can make our move. With this, the commander of the governor's mansion's bodyguards came out of the 2nd floor of the ship with a few bodyguards. He looked down a few times and shouted a few times. What happened? The bodyguards on the deck also shouted back and more people heard them. When the brigade commander heard this, he was shocked. He looked around and saw Lu Baishui in the corridor on the 2nd floor. With a cold expression, he grabbed the hilt of the saber at his waist and strode over. He stopped 2 or 3 steps away from Lu Baishui and stared at him. "Captain Lu, what happened?" Lu Baishui frowned. "How can I ask the commander? The sailors we recruited were originally a group of desperados. How could I have thought that they would go this far and betray me at this time?" The commander was furious. He frowned and said, "Don't you know the people you recruited?" Lu Baishui sneered and interrupted him. "The people I recruited? Officer, since you work in the governor's office and accompanied that Taoist priest to the sea, you must be the governor's trusted aide. Don't you know if it was you who released these people from prison and arranged for them to board my ship?" The commander was stunned. Lu Baishui snorted again. "You and I are not stupid. Before such a thing happened, I could pretend that I didn't know anything. I would just treat it as a way to avoid disaster and treat the 1,000,000 taels of silver as a gift to the commander-in-chief. Until now. Humph, whether we can survive or not is up to you. Don't you have people on that ship?" At this time, the relationship between the 400 to 500 people on the 2 ships was very complicated. On Li Yunxin's ship, there were people from the Freemasonry, Munanju and Xie Xing. According to Lu Baishui, there were also prisoners and spies arranged by the government. And the people arranged by Lu Baishui, it was really a mess. But what Lu Baishui said was obviously the truth. The brigade marshal was speechless for a while after hearing Lu Baishui's words. He blew his beard and glared at him for a while before cursing loudly, "Damn it, your mouth is really good. I'll deal with you later. What should we do now? Turn around now." Lu Baishui stopped laughing. He looked at the commander for a while coldly and snorted, "Now? Oh, the Height Song is obviously prepared. If we turn around now, we may not be able to avoid it. If you want to live, you'd better wake up your soldiers right now. Even if our ship manages to avoid the collision, the Height Song will still have to move backwards. Then it will be a boarding battle. If we can get the Height Song and take it, we can live. Otherwise, let's all die here with our own thoughts." Chapter 604. Although the commander had a bad temper, he was trusted by the governor of the Stormy Waves Road. Obviously he wasn't a reckless guy. Seeing that he couldn't get any advantage from Lu Baishui, he didn't want to waste his breath on him. He glared at Lu Baishui and turned to the soldiers beside him. "Watch him. Unsheath your sword. If he dares to move, kill him on the spot." The 4 soldiers shouted, "Yes, sir." They drew their short swords and walked toward Lu Baishui fiercely. But Lu Baishui didn't move, his face expressionless. The commander looked at Li Yunxin behind Lu Baishui. "What are you doing?" Li Yunxin had been doing well on the ship these days, so he was a well-known figure. 2 of the 4 soldiers had asked him about good or bad luck, so they thought they knew his background. He raised his leg to kick Li Yunxin away. "Sir, this kid is a swindler. Get out of here. It's none of your business." The grass on the graves of those who dared to scold him like this was already 3 feet high. But Li Yunxin didn't care about the soldiers' good intentions. Taking advantage of the slope, he turned around and slipped away. The commander stared at him for a while and then turned to Lu Baishui with a hideous smile. "I know Master Lu is famous and you're a kung fu master. But listen carefully, you can fight but you can't kill. These 4 soldiers of mine have killed more people than you. Master Lu, don't take things too hard and exchange their 4 lives for yours." After saying that, he raised his hand to hold on to the railing and jumped down, landing beside Xie Sheng. At this time the deck was in a mess. Those who came up to bask in the sun were businessmen who had nothing to do. Now that the situation was not good, they all wanted to run down the cabin. If they really fought, there would be stray arrows on the deck. But someone thought he was smart and said they couldn't go down. If the Height Song crashed into the ship and the seawater entered the cabin, wouldn't they all die? Thus they swarmed up again. There was a captain on the ship, but he was pulled over by the commander and told to turn the rudder. The captain was also one of Lu Baishui's men, but he couldn't care less at this moment. His life was more important. He hastily ordered the sailors to lower the oars, and the men on deck to lower the sails. But the sailor and the confusion of the merchants below stumbled and delayed things for a long time. When the sailors finally got into position, the merchants also ran to the deck. Another wise man said that there would be an arrow on the deck to starboard. They should run to the left of the forecastle. There were about 40 to 50 people in the caravan. Logically speaking, these 40 to 50 people should be easy to deal with, but Lu Baishui was right. Among the remaining so-called sailors, there were a few who were genuine, but there were quite a few who were criminals arranged by the governor of the Stormy Waves path from the prison. But the real fugitives either became officials or nobles, or became heroes of the martial arts world. How capable could they be who had been thrown into prison and forced to come to sea? Thus chaos ensued. Nearly 100 people swarmed to the port side of the giant ship, and even the body of the ship seemed to shake. Fortunately, the soldiers standing on the side of the ship were not shaken off. The commander of the brigade brought more than 100 people on board. There were about 70 people on the Taowu, and less than 30 on the Height Song. Now that the less than 30 people had been killed, the remaining soldiers had to maintain order and prepare to fight the enemy, which made it difficult for them to do so. In the end, he gritted his teeth, pulled out his sword, and killed 4 or 5 people before he calmed the frightened rabbits down. Then he arranged the formation and asked Xie Daozhang, who was next to him, what to do. After doing all this, the Height Song was very close to the Taowu. The Taowu was dodging and the Height Song was also turning. Seeing that the Height Song was about to hit the side of the Taowu, the commander of the brigade shouted for his soldiers to stand firm and get ready to take over. They could already see the people on the opposite ship. There were about 100 of them and they were holding bright weapons in their hands. They seemed to be quite organized and their positions were also good, a sharp contrast to the panicked people on the Taowu. The commander of the brigade was stunned. He snatched the monocular from the soldier's hand and took a closer look. The weapons in the hands of the dozens of people in front were long and narrow swords of the army. Indeed, the 30 soldiers had been killed. But the problem was, where did the weapons in the hands of the remaining 70 or 80 people come from? It was not a random preparation, nor did it look like a private stash. They had hooks, huge axes, shields, and everything else. It was a proper naval battle formation. Damn it. The commander of the brigade was shocked, and he turned to look at the tower behind him. Lu Baishui had disappeared. The 4 soldiers with their swords were also gone, but there was blood flowing down the corridor on the 2nd floor. Even though he couldn't think clearly at the moment, but a chill had crept up his spine instinctively. They seemed to have been tricked. As soon as this thought came to his mind, he found something strange. Previously, when he was shouting on the deck to arrange the formation, the people on the deck were also running around and shouting. Although he killed 4 or 5 people to show his power and finally made them quiet down, they shouldn't be as quiet as now. On the deck, there were only 30 or 40 people left. Most of them were merchants and a few really timid sailors. The rest of the people were all gone. He immediately shouted, "Defend the enemy." After saying this, he hurriedly added, "Watch your back." But the Haiching was so big. He and half of his soldiers were near the bow of the ship because he was afraid that the enemy ship would hit the bow of the ship. But when he shouted like this, the order couldn't reach every soldier's ears immediately. So the killing began. In fact, it was very easy. The ship was supposed to carry 200 people. Of them, 46 were merchants and the rest were sailors. The soldiers of the governor's mansion forced their way onto the ship, and there were more than 70 people. Now there were more than 30 people gathered at the bow of the ship, and the remaining 40 or so stayed in the belly and stern to defend against the enemy. First, the Sealine appeared in the sea, which scared them. Then they found that the Haiching was going to hit the ship in reverse. Once they were hit into the water, they would die immediately. So the soldiers' attention was focused on the group of people at the bow of the Haiching. They had seen the ugly behavior of these useless people on the ship. They didn't expect them to defend against the enemy, as long as they didn't make trouble. But now, this group of useless people was going to kill them. When the brigade marshal realized that something was wrong, the people hiding behind the ship rushed out with long spears in their hands. They didn't fight with the well-trained soldiers but just raised their spears and stabbed. In the first round, 7 or 8 soldiers who didn't even have time to turn their heads were pierced through. The rest, who were holding short knives, couldn't react in time, and another 7 or 8 died. When they finally realized that something was wrong and wanted to fight back, the number of people sneaking up on them was 3 times their number. Moreover, they weren't a motley crew and their cooperation was quite skilled. It was a sneak attack. They had the advantage in numbers, weapons, momentum, and terrain. How could they fight back? In just a few breaths, some were stabbed to death and some were pushed into the sea. Half of the soldiers on the Haiching were gone. Screams came one after another, but it was impossible for the brigade marshal and Xia Sheng to rescue them. The bow of the ship, together with the 2 of them, was surrounded. They were surrounded by sailors on the ship. Most of them had been released from the prison on the stormy waves path. But now they looked solemn and calm, even calmer than the soldiers of the governor's office. According to Li Yunxin, the spears in their hands were 4 meters long, and they were carried by 2 people. The spearheads were sharpened and burned with fire. They were very lethal when they stabbed people, and it was a piece of cake for them to deal with soldiers who didn't wear armor. When a ship went out to sea, it always brought wood to repair it. Now, those wood had become weapons. What was more shocking was the people who used these weapons. From the beginning to the end of the incident, it only took a quarter of an hour. The soldiers of the governor's office as well as Xia Daozhang, who didn't make a move and only watched coldly, were like turtles in a jar. It was hard to say for Xia Daozhang. As long as these soldiers with long spears charged together, they would be driven into the sea and corroded into a pool of blood. The brigade marshal seemed to be unable to accept this fact. He was dumbfounded and didn't know what to say. Then he turned his head to look at the Haiching. The huge ship that was about to crash into them had changed its course. After another quarter of an hour, the 2 ships brushed past each other and went in the same direction again. The people at the bow of the Haiching burst into cheers. The crowd parted and pushed more than 30 soldiers of the governor's office to the side of the ship. The brigade marshal suddenly realized what they were going to do and was about to say something. Plop, plop. Like dumplings, the soldiers who were tied up were pushed off the ship and fell into the poisonous water. The people cheered again, even drowning out the screams of the soldiers. At this time the crowd on the Haiching also parted. Lu Baishui walked out. He stood 5 or 6 steps away from the captives expressionlessly, hands behind his back, and stared at Xia Sheng for a while. But Xia Sheng was also expressionless. He looked at the brigade marshal and asked, "Lord Su, How does it feel to be a captive? So the brigade marshal's surname was Su. The brigade marshal Su widened his eyes and gritted his teeth. What a wicked person. How dare you? You dare to kill an official at sea. Are you planning to become a fugitive and join the pirates? He said this with righteous indignation. But when the crowd heard it, they all burst into laughter, as if the brigade marshal had told a joke. Lu Baishui also smiled. When the brigade marshal and the soldiers looked at each other with laughter, he waved his hand. Everyone immediately fell silent. It could be said that orders were strictly enforced. Join the pirates? Lu Baishui said with a smile. Join who? Join Lu Fei? The brigade marshal glared at him. You killed the soldiers of the governor's office. Humph, I'm afraid he won't accept you. So it's true. Lu Baishui turned around with his hands behind his back and paced 2 steps. The passage that the crowd made for him was only wide enough for one person to walk. Now he was pacing. Wherever he took a step, the people on that side would silently move aside. But the people behind him would immediately fill in the gaps, not giving the soldiers any chance to escape. Just 2 steps and Brigade Marshal Su was shocked. Such tacit understanding and obedience were rare even among the elite soldiers of the East Sea nation. What on earth was this? It said that the governor of the Stormy Waves Road secretly colluded with Sea King Lu Fei. Lu Fei helped him kill some small pirates, and then gave him 30% of the wealth from robbing merchant ships. The governor didn't really send the navy to kill them. So they lived in peace and benefited from each other. So it's true now? The brigade marshal stared at him. Nonsense. Lu Baishui smiled again. It's already this time. Brigade Marshal Su, why don't you think about when and how these people were thrown into prison by you? Those who didn't know what he was talking about might be confused. But for Brigade Marshal Su, it was like a thunder exploding in his head. Just because of this sentence. He felt that he suddenly understood the cause and effect of the matter. The order he received was very simple. He led the soldiers to go to the sea with Taoist Xie to find the Spirit Mountain. On the way he did one more thing. The governor wanted Lu Baishui's family business. But he couldn't do it on land, so he could do it on the sea. When they reached the East Sea chain, the local officials who also received the order would cooperate with the governor's soldiers on the ship to arrest Lu Baishui. If he didn't agree and wanted to cause trouble, it didn't matter. Among the 400 people on the ship, there were more than 200 who were pardoned from the governor's prison. They had already secretly formed an army and set up their subordinates. They promised that if they helped the army to do something, they would be given official positions. This way Lu Baishui bought the ship. The money would naturally go to the governor. He also asked him to gather enough people to go to sea. That would be suicidal. Wouldn't it be the best of both worlds? But at this time, Brigade Marshal Su realized that the problem was with those prisoners. Lu Baishui asked him when they were caught and why they were caught. They were caught after annihilating the original pirates on the 2 giant ships. Everyone knew that there was an internal conflict in Sea King Lu Fei's lair. The 2 pirate leaders brought these 2 huge ships to surrender. But they were all killed by the governor and the ships were captured. Brigade Marshal Su knew the inside story of this matter. The 2 pirate leaders who came to surrender. The governor recognized them. On the night they docked, he was the one who led the team to get them. They were tied up and sent to the governor's mansion. But once they entered the backyard, they were released and were politely invited in. They talked with the governor for half an hour, and no one knew what they said to annoy the governor, so he rushed in with his men to kill them. It took a lot of effort to kill them, and one of them kept saying things like, greedy. About 3 months after the execution of the pirates, another group of refugees came from the west. It was said that the villages near the old Demon Mountain suffered a natural disaster and couldn't survive, so they became thieves. But they didn't kill or harm people and only robbed everywhere. Like a swarm of locusts, they ate and ran. It happened near the provincial capital, so it was easy to catch them and put them in prison. The pirate leaders came with their ships in spring. The refugees were put in prison in summer. Now, it was only a few months later. Until now. Brigade Marshal Su saw the group of refugees behind Lu Baishui, and suddenly realized, what refugees? What natural disaster? They obviously pretended to be refugees to fight their way into the provincial capital. But why did they fight their way into the provincial capital? Thinking of this, he was shocked. You. Lu Baishui stood still. He looked at him coldly. This spring. 2 ships, 297 brothers' lives. Do you think no one will find you to settle this account? The brigade marshal was stunned. He suddenly clenched his sword and said, You are Lu Fei. Chapter 605. Lu Baishui sneered, "You are not that stupid." The commander yelled again, "No. Impossible. Lu Fei has been on the sea for more than 50 years. How can you be Lu Fei?" Lu Baishui still sneered, "Do you think Lu Fei is alone?" The commander was stunned for a while. "How many Lu Feis are there?" "Sea King Lu Fei is a title. It has been passed down to me for 1,000 years. Lu Baishui smiled, "You dare to come to the sea without even knowing this. You are courting death." Hearing Lu Baishui's words, even if the commander didn't know how many people Lu Fei was, he knew that the sailors on the ship were actually pirates. Moreover, they were well-trained pirates who were even stronger than the Imperial Army at sea. At this time, Li Yunxin was still watching. He had been watching since the Hai Tsang turned. He had been watching the people on the ship for the past few days and found some clues. For example, those people were discussing and plotting. There were also many people who said different things. They must have had unusual experiences in the past. However, he was not a god who could see the world clearly. From what he had observed, he only knew that these people were not good people. Many of them were discussing how to seize the ship. He didn't expect that they would seize the ship in this way. They didn't seize the ship from Lu Baishui but from the soldiers. This messed up his plan. He had wanted to observe Xie Xing secretly. Then he would send him to Dragon Island and get more information from him. But now he and the soldiers were surrounded. This was troublesome. It wasn't Xie Xing who was in trouble. It was Lu Baishui. Since the Hai Tsang wouldn't crash into them, the environment on the Hai Tsang wasn't dangerous, considering the venom in the sea. Xie Xing was an emptiness realm expert. To him, emptiness realm experts were like ants. To emptiness realm experts, mortals were also weak. Xie Xing's current body was tyrannical, far surpassing the so-called Vajra body realm of secular martial arts. When he mobilized his spiritual power, those wooden spears that fiercely stabbed his body would at most cause superficial wounds. The only weak points were probably the eyes and the lower body. However, he wouldn't easily expose these 2 points to others. If Xie Xing wanted to escape or even counterattack, he could force his way into the crowd and start a massacre. The soldiers followed. Lu Baishui and the other mortals couldn't resist them. If he had extra spiritual power to write talismans and throw 1 or 2 into the crowd, it would have been more efficient. On the other hand, Lu Baishui was not stupid. Otherwise, Li Yunxin wouldn't have been able to see some clues until the day the 2 giant ships were about to set sail. He knew that Xie Xing was a cultivator, so what preparations did he have? Li Yunxin hid behind the crowd and watched calmly. This crowd was none other than the traveling merchants. These traveling merchants really didn't know anything, including Pan He. While looking at Lu Baishui and the governor's mansion's soldiers, he was also paying attention to these people. With the steward of the Freemasons on this ship, there was no reason why the people from Southern Wood House couldn't come up. There must be people from Moon Anju on the Tao. Who was it? But while he was calm, others were not as calm as he was. The traveling merchants just wanted to take the ship to the East Sea chain. Knowing that there were soldiers on the ship, they weren't worried. Instead, they were happy and felt that this trip would be safe. They panicked when they saw the Sealine, but they knew that they would be fine as long as they didn't get splashed by the seawater. But now they realized that they had boarded a pirate ship. And this pirate was so bold that he even killed the soldiers of the governor's mansion. An hour ago they were basking in the sun and fishing happily, but now they were on the battlefield. The timid ones were so scared that they wet their pants. Those who were a little braver also turned pale. These people recognized Li Yunxin. The one who was close to him whispered, "Little immortal, you told me that there would be a bloody disaster this year, but we would be able to turn bad luck into good luck. Are you referring to this trip?" Li Yunxin glanced at him. It was the guy who liked to show off. He smiled, "I was just joking. How would I know?" The guy's face turned bitter. "You?" As soon as he said this word, he heard the brigade commander shout, "Taoist Xie, it's time for you to take action." This sound scared the rest of his words back into his mouth. Pan He, who had been staring at Li Yunxin, turned to look at Xie Xing. Xie Xing was very calm from beginning to end. He looked at the situation on the ship coldly and didn't rush to take action. Even after Lu Baishui and Travel Commander Su had shown their cards, she only had a cold smile on her face, carefully watching Lu Baishui's every move. Li Yunxin knew that he was watching Lu Baishui's attitude. Even if Lu Baishui showed the slightest fear of Taoist Xie, Xie Xing probably wouldn't directly conflict with him. Because it meant that Lu Baishui knew Xie Xing's strength. Xie Xing had taken the dead bodies off the ship. But this was not enough to make Lu Baishui afraid. Xie Xing would think that Lu Baishui knew his background. And if he knew his background and did this, it meant that he was prepared. There were other methods to deal with him. Xie Sheng and Li Yunxin were smart people. But their personalities were polar opposites. Li Yunxin was never afraid of taking risks. He was like a madman who wanted to die. Every time he took a risk, it was a reward for him. It also made him crazier. If he had complete emotions in his previous life, maybe he would be a big gambler. This time he took Lu Baishui's ship to the Dragon Island was a good example. He never thought that he could deceive everyone and find out the situation on the Dragon Island without leaving any traces. If he really did it, it would be the best. But if something happened or someone found out, it was no big deal, he just had to act according to the situation. But Xie Sheng was the opposite of Li Yunxin. He was extremely cautious and conservative. Not only that, he wouldn't hide in the mountains for more than 10 years. If it was Li Yunxin, he would have already run out. So at this time he didn't act blindly without thinking. But Lu Baishui didn't let him see through him. He sneered, "Take action? A Taoist who knows how to play tricks. Do you fools really think he is an immortal? Push them into the sea." After saying this, he immediately turned around. It was as if the fate of Taoist Xie and the army was already decided and he didn't need to pay attention to them anymore. So Li Yunxin knew that this guy really had other tricks up his sleeves. He sighed. He had thought that he had met a true hero. But he didn't expect that Lu Baishui was not completely honest. No matter what difficulties he had, he still hid his identity from him. Although Li Yunxin was the same, when Lu Baishui turned around and glanced at him, Li Yunxin still smiled at him. His eyes didn't move, but the corner of his mouth twitched. This kind of smile was called a fake smile. Chapter 606. Lu Baishui turned his face away. It seemed that he didn't want Li Yunxin's identity to be exposed, which meant that although he had changed from a land hero to a sea hero, at least he still remembered Li Yunxin. Although, he should also be suspecting whether Li Yunxin's identity was real or fake. He turned around and gave the order. The pirates around him were astonishingly fast. The second mate on the Taowu immediately shouted in a low voice, "Raise your spears forward." The pirates let out a low growl as they ferociously thrust their long spears forward. At this moment, Xie Sheng finally made his move. He was expressionless at first, but he was still expressionless now. Suddenly he made a sword gesture with his right hand and slashed in the air. Thus, in front of him and the pirates, 10 small golden swords immediately appeared. Each sword was about the length of an adult man's forearm. They vibrated slightly and made a buzzing sound, even the air around them was distorted. It was like a hot summer day, and the air above the road was distorted because of the heat. But these 10 swords didn't bring heat, but coldness. The pirates who were advancing were stunned, and even the second officer who gave the order was stunned. For these mortals who only heard about cultivators and immortals in legends, the sudden appearance of the golden swords in the air might be more shocking than blood and corpses. "I am a cultivator. I don't want to kill more people," Xie Sheng said coldly. "Step back." He was standing on the side of the ship. He made a sword gesture with one hand and put the other hand behind his back. He stood in the wind, his clothes fluttering, full of the aura and demeanor of a master. After saying a few more unfathomable words in an awe-inspiring tone, the spears that were originally pointed at him trembled and slowly retracted. The second mate also took a step back, looked at Lu Baishui and whispered, "Lord Lu, what should we do?" Lu Baishui turned around again and frowned at Xie Sheng. "Taoist Xie, this is between me and the governor's mansion. This is a grudge between me and the governor's mansion. You are a virtuous person, so why must you get involved?" After saying this, he paused and his throat moved. When he said the first few words, his tone was calm and composed, as if he was not the least bit afraid of the 10 light swords in the sky. However, this slight pause betrayed his emotions. Xie Sheng noticed this and snorted softly, "These people want to go out to sea with me to look for Dragon Island. If you kill them, who will serve me?" He flicked his fingers lightly. One of the lightsabers flew out and pointed at Lu Baishui's forehead. "I won't get involved in the affairs of you mortals. The people from the Haitsong retreated to this ship. Leave the Haitsong to us. I won't make things difficult for you." Commander Su called out, "Dao Zhang, this won't do. Who among us knows how to steer a boat? You may as well kill them all, save a few of the stewards. If you do not wish to commit murder, cast a spell on them all. Us brothers are not tired, we cut off their heads one by one." Lu Baishui ignored the brigade commander's nonsense. He looked at Xie Sheng. "You're making things difficult for me. I want to bring both ships back to Aquarius Bay. We can't lose a single one." Commander Su was about to call out again. Lu Baishui waved his hand and smiled. But I also know that you have other things to do. How about we discuss a compromise? Daozhang, please allow us to kill these soldiers to comfort the souls of our brothers who died in vain. Then you will follow me to Aquarius Bay. I will find another ship suitable for going out to sea with sailors. We will respectfully send you to the sea to look for dragons. How about this? Commander Su laughed loudly. Bullsh*T. Daozhang is an expert. Why would he and you lowly? His voice stopped abruptly. Xiexing flicked his finger. The lightsaber that was originally pointed at Lu Baishui's forehead turned around and pierced through Commander Su's head without any resistance. That lightsaber did not stop. It drew a beautiful arc and returned to the sword formation. Commander Su was still smiling. His face was still full of mockery and disdain. He maintained this posture and fell into the sea with a splash. Then a series of gurgling red blood bubbles appeared. The crowd was in an uproar. Those soldiers were originally a little relieved. But with this sudden turn of events, these people couldn't wrap their heads around it. They didn't know why. Xia Daozhang killed the brigade marshal? But Lu Baishui reacted much faster than them. He immediately shouted, "Kill!" Xiexing killed Commander Su and turned his wrist again. The 10 lightsabers immediately returned to his side and stood upright to protect him. When the pirates heard the order, they were stunned for a moment and then shouted. Dozens of spears rushed forward at the same time. More than a dozen people were stabbed to death and pushed down. They retracted their spears and attacked again. None of the officers and soldiers on the deck were left. Lu Baishui sneered. Daozhang Xie is really sensible. There was a faint smile on Xiexing's face, but it was also cold. He said, "There is no such thing as sensible. In my eyes there is no difference." Lu Baishui shook his head. "Of course there is difference. I promise to send you to the sea. When we arrive at Aquarius Bay, I will naturally send you away." Li Yunxin and the merchants around him witnessed all this. Their mood could be described as ups and downs. Of course they were talking about those ordinary people. First, they saw the appearance of the pirates, and then they saw that the Imperial Army had the upper hand. Then the commander of the Imperial Army was killed by Daozhang Xie. Finally, Daozhang Xie conspired with the pirates. These people saw all this and felt like they were in a dream. They did not expect so many twists and turns. They could not understand why Xiexing betrayed them without warning. Li Yunxin just smiled and said to himself, "How can I be the protagonist if I am so cowardly?" But he guessed from the beginning that Xiexing would kill Commander Su. Based on his speculation about Xiexing's personality. Now it seemed that his speculation was extremely accurate. In other words, he had almost figured out Xiexing's temper. He was timid. This timid came from his sense of superiority. Li Yunxin also had this sense of superiority. The place I came from was much better than here. What kind of people have I not seen? With this sense of superiority, he would be proud of his identity. But because of their different temperaments, the same sense of superiority turned into two extremes. Li Yunxin was very bold. Since he had a sense of superiority, why should he be afraid of the country bumpkins of this world? It was a disgrace to his identity to live an ignoble life like the ordinary people here. Xiexing was very timid. "My life is so precious. It's not worth it for me to die in your hands." And the sentence, "in my eyes, there is no difference." Lu Baishui felt that he was saying that his group of pirates and Imperial Army were not good people. Maybe they would not keep their promises. Only Li Yunxin knew what he meant. He was saying that they were all just ants. There was no need to talk about morality with ants. Of course he would use them and kill them when he should. How could people care about the contempt of ants? Xiexing was now an emptiness realm cultivator. In the past, just a month ago, an emptiness realm cultivator with the same talent as him had the ability to kill all the people on the ship. The spiritual power in the world was endless. An emptiness realm cultivator could do many things with the spiritual power in the world. That Commander Su told Xiexing to freeze the people on the ship so that they could be beheaded one by one. Freeze was not easy to say. But it was still possible to use a talisman to kill dozens of people in an instant. However, the qi in the world was chaotic. Xiexing could only use the spiritual power in his body, supplemented by the spiritual energy that he had absorbed with great difficulty from heaven and earth. But he was such a cautious person. How could he use the power in his body to protect his soldiers and kill more pirates? He just wanted to go out to sea. It did not matter who he cooperated with. After boarding the Taowu, the Imperial Army had no value to him. In fact, it was the same for Lu Baishui. He wanted to take revenge on the governor of the Stormy Waves Road. Xiexing was not part of his revenge plan. If he could avoid more casualties, he should be happy to see it. Therefore Xiexing turned his wrist. The 10 light swords that were protecting him immediately turned into 10 small spots of light that revolved around him. He took 2 steps forward. The pirates made way for him until he reached Lu Baishui's side. His sharp eyes swept across the crowd, pausing on Pan He's face. He said to Lu Baishui, "I have a question. If I wanted to kill you just now, who would you ask for help?" Lu Baishui looked at the sea and smiled. "This is the first time Taoist priest went out to sea. It's not strange that you don't know. It is said that there is a fairy mountain above the East Sea. On the fairy mountain are Shinryu and the Dragon King. Since Taoist priest is looking for the Dragon Island, how could you not know? The Dragon King of the sea doesn't like cultivators. If Taoist priest Xiexing used spells to kill people on the ship, it might attract the demon immortals. So Taoist priest Xiexing is smart." Xiexing's face changed. He took a step forward and got closer to Lu Baishui. "Have you seen Shinryu and the Dragon King?" Lu Baishui's body leaned back slightly, but he didn't step back. "I haven't seen Shinryu and the Dragon King. But I know that someone went out to sea to look for Shinryu." He didn't say anything else. Li Yunxin let out a soft ha, in the middle of the group of traveling merchants. He smiled. Someone went out to sea to look for Shinryu. In the ears of others, this sentence was just a casual remark. Anyone who lived in the East Sea Kingdom or even the neighboring countries along the coast should have such a thought. Every year there were indeed many desperate people who drank and went out to sea. They thought that once they found the dragon god, they could realize their dreams and come back from the dead. But if it was heard by someone else, Lu Baishui once told Li Yunxin that Shang Guanyu went out to sea to look for Shinryu. And Li Yunxin told him that Xiexing was the villain who destroyed his family and chased him all the way here. At this moment, Lu Baishui said this to Xiexing. If what Li Yunxin told him was true, such a normal sentence would definitely attract Xiexing's attention and vigilance. He wanted to make use of Xiexing's reaction to see if what Li Yunxin had said to him was the truth. Li Yunxin smiled again. Then the smile slowly froze on his face and he stared at Lu Baishui. Since he used such a reason, how could he not predict what would happen? Now that Lu Baishui wanted to see Xiexing's expression, he would definitely see what he wanted to see. Xiexing thought that Shinryu was the person he was looking for, so no matter who went to look for Shinryu, he would be moved. But Lu Baishui actually used what Lu Baishui told him before to test him. Li Yunxin stared at Lu Baishui for about 3 breaths and then took a deep breath. Then he slowly exhaled. He saw that Xiexing was indeed moved, because of what Lu Baishui said. Someone is looking for Shinryu? He slowly frowned. Who? Lu Baishui was silent for a while and then he smiled. Many. Just in Baishui town alone, there are 6 or 7 people who want to go out to sea to look for Shinryu. Who among us hasn't thought about it? Xiexing's eyes became cold. Are you making fun of me? Lu Baishui shook his head. Master Xia, don't worry and take the boat. When we arrive at Aquarius Bay, we will arrange for someone to send you to Dragon Island. After saying this, he turned around and was about to leave. But he didn't expect that Xiexing, who was calm and didn't want to cause trouble, suddenly changed into a different person. He flicked his finger, and the 10 light pearls around him immediately expanded and became 10 golden light swords again. 9 swords forced the pirates around them away, and the last one was hanging upside down above Lu Baishui's head. Make it clear, Xiexing said word by word. Who is looking for Shinryu? Do you know how to go to Dragon Island? It was originally calm and peaceful. But because of one sentence, even Lu Baishui didn't expect it. He didn't know that finding his own organization was Xiexing's first priority. And that night, Li Yunxin planted a seed in Xiexing's heart, making him even more wary of this world and the people in this world. Now that Lu Baishui asked this question, Xiexing, who was a smart person, how could he think of Lu Baishui as a simple pirate? He must think that Lu Baishui knew something about Shinryu. Otherwise, why would Lu Baishui say that someone went out to sea to look for Shinryu? Even Lu Baishui didn't expect this sudden change. At this moment, Xiexing's face was a little ferocious. The aura of a cultivator was completely released. It was like an angry beast facing Lu Baishui, making people feel the most intense pressure at the first moment. The pirates around them also felt the intense danger. They didn't doubt that if Master Lu didn't answer to Xiexing's satisfaction, he would probably die on the spot. Even if he was satisfied, it would probably be a disaster. This Taoist priest Xia was alone when he stood on the deck and killed Brigade Commander Su without warning. But now he became another person. Is this what a cultivator looks like? Lu Baishui's face also became cold. Xiexing wants to fight? Did you forget what I said just now? The monster in the sea, Where did you hear that from? Or did you know it from the beginning? But Xiexing didn't care about what he said now. It was like before, he was a lazy beast that didn't care about the ants crawling on his body. But now that he found out that the ants had something he wanted, why would he care about the threats? The sea was so vast. Even if there was a monster, how could it coincidentally come to this place? Who are you? After he said this, the light sword above Lu Baishui's head fell with a buzzing sound. The tip of the sword pressed against his head and cut his hair. Soon, blood flowed down along his temples. Chapter 607. The pirates let out a cry of surprise. Lu Baishui must have a high prestige in these people's hearts. They had seen Xiexing's ferocious appearance and the mysterious means he used. But when he saw that Master Lu was injured, he shouted and thrust his spear forward. The 9 light swords protecting Xiexing's body immediately reacted. They made a soft sound and formed a light curtain in the blink of an eye, sweeping toward the crowd. Not only the spear was easily broken, but the wrists of the people holding the spear were also cut off. The lightsabers were extremely sharp. They didn't feel pain until the spear and the hand fell to the ground. Suddenly there were screams and the smell of blood spread. Lu Baishui frowned and shouted, "Go back! No one move! Go back!" The pirates cared about him and he cared about his subordinates. After such a shout, everyone knew that they were no match for him, so they could only glare at Xiexing. Although they didn't retreat, they didn't fight anymore. "I don't want to kill more people. And I don't want to cause trouble," Xiexing said coldly, "so you should know. If you don't answer my questions, you will die. Now." Lu Baishui stared at him for a while and suddenly laughed. "Okay. I will tell you, someone told me about you." Li Yunxin smiled in the crowd. But Lu Baishui was silent after saying this. Xiexing waited for a while and frowned, and nothing. Xiexing looked at him deeply. "You want to tell me that you only know this much?" "Of course I know a lot." Lu Baishui smiled, "But I won't tell you." Xiexing snorted. Then his fingers moved slightly. The lightsaber that cut Lu Baishui's hair slowly moved downwards, through his forehead, nose, lips, chin, neck, and finally stopped at his chest. The lightsaber moved silently. But slowly, a line of blood appeared. Lu Baishui's whole face was cut in half by a thin line of blood. The lightsaber cut his skin. Then more and more blood gathered and flowed down his face. It seemed to be some kind of demonic and evil makeup. "I have a way to cut you open alive without killing you. I can let you see how your heart beats and how your intestines move." Xiexing said, "You only have one life. Don't be stupid." Lu Baishui touched the blood on his lips and looked at it. Then he looked at Xiexing calmly. "I was entrusted by someone, so I'll do my best. If you want to say that I'm being foolish, I've been foolish for decades. I've seen the sharpest knives and the strongest liquors. What's death to me?" Xiexing sneered, "Of course death is nothing. But before you die," as he said this, Lu Baishui suddenly lifted his hand and tore off his coat. Thus his upper body was exposed. Xiexing was stunned. The merchants on the deck were also stunned. His chest was no different from an ordinary person's. But on his back, abdomen, and ribs, there were densely packed red runes. However, upon closer inspection, one would realize that they were not tattoos. Instead, it was a scar that had healed after the burn. There seemed to be a strange light in Lu Baishui's eyes. He slightly raised his head and looked at Xiexing disdainfully. "The holy fire shines brightly, the holy light shines brightly. What joy is there in life, what suffering is there in death? Do you know how I got these runes on my body? After I joined the sect, the first thing I received was the holy fire commandment. I used a red-hot knife to slowly burn the damning scripture on my body. How is this pain compared to your methods?" The pain brought by burning was indeed the most severe pain that a human could feel. Xiexing knew this clearly. He stared at Lu Baishui suspiciously and coldly for a while, then said, "You're so righteous now. Why did you ask me about this before?" Lu Baishui sneered, "Even if I'm loyal to someone, I have to find out whether it's true or not. I just don't want to be stupid. Now that I know it's true, if you still want to ask, just kill me." Xiexing stared at him for a while and his expression became cold. He moved his finger. At this moment, Li Yunxin's finger also moved. Ordinary people only felt that a moment had passed, but it was enough for cultivators and demons to do many things. Xiexing made a hand gesture, activated the spirit energy in the ocean of qi and mountain of snow, and sent an order to the light sword that was formed by his own spirit energy outside his body. As soon as the order was given, the light sword immediately cut Lu Baishui's chest in half. And at this moment, Li Yunxin also sent out a fierce demon power. This demon power was about to break Xie Sheng's protective light sword and make his dharma lose its effect. But after this moment, both of them changed their minds. The giant ship suddenly shook. But at this moment, the sky was still blue. The sea between the Taowu and the Haizong suddenly became turbulent. It was as if a terrible force was stirring the water under the sea, or like a volcano that couldn't suppress its anger. With a loud bang, a water column suddenly surged up from the sea. This water column was even higher than the ship's railing, but not a single drop of water splashed outwards. The seawater was tightly gathered in one place and became solid. On top of this transparent water column, the water splashed open, revealing a general wearing a white helmet and armor. This general seemed to be a junior general. He had red lips and white teeth, was neatly dressed and held a three-pointed, double-edged sword in his hand. His expression was dark and his eyes were wide open, staring straight at Xie Sheng who was on the deck. After staring for a breath's worth of time, his body slightly leaned forward. The wave that was supporting him then moved towards the Taowu, all the way to the side of the ship. The two huge ships were still moving swiftly with their sails flapping. The wave under his feet followed the two ships steadily and did not fall at all. He reached the side of the ship but didn't jump off the wave. He only looked down at Xie Sheng and shouted, "I'm General Fubo under the command of the Eastern Sea Dragon King. Who dares to use Dharma on the Eastern Sea?" Seeing this scene, everyone was shocked. The pirates were fine. Swords and soldiers always gave people an inexplicable sense of confidence. So they all clenched their weapons. Although they were surprised and panicked, they didn't go too far. But the merchants were different. They were all businessmen and very few of them were hot-blooded. But now they saw a so-called General Fubo with their own eyes. First, 3 people fainted without saying a word. The rest all knelt on the ground as if they were blown by the wind, shouting, "Dragon King, help us," and so on. Li Yunxin was also among the crowd. He sighed, and sat down cross-legged, watching the show. He turned into a young boy not very tall. A group of men in front of him were kowtowing, which covered him. But even if he didn't cover himself, the demon who called himself General Fubo didn't notice him. Because at this time Lu Baishui smiled and pointed at Xie Sheng. "General. He was the one who used Dharma just now. He even threatened me with the lives of hundreds of people on these 2 ships. General, please investigate." When Xie Sheng used Dharma to threaten him, he didn't panic at all. Now that something strange had happened on the sea, and a demon who called himself General Fubo appeared, he didn't panic. Looking at this demon was like looking at a general in the secular world. Li Yunxin frowned slightly and stared at Lu Baishui. He had misjudged. He didn't see that this person had so many stories. But it wasn't that he had become stupid, and it wasn't that Lu Baishui was the smartest person in the world. But he didn't want to see things the way he used to. At least after he said goodbye to Lu Gongzan in the forest of Dingzhou. When looking at a person, he began to try not to use his own subjective will to define this person's identity. He began to try to see and think like a stranger. When he first saw a person, that person was a blank piece of paper. He slowly interacted with this person, and then based on what he saw and heard, he added something to this blank piece of paper. He was trying to feel the feeling of being an ordinary person. But now it seemed that it wasn't going well. Lu Baishui wasn't the kind of person he thought. At least he wasn't as simple as he thought. In fact, he should have seen it a long time ago. Now that he carefully recalled the various details of his interaction with Lu Baishui, he realized that there were indeed many suspicious points. The problem was that everyone would look suspicious. Even a person with a broad mind would have some expressions on their face that would make people suspicious, if you looked at them with colored glasses. This meant that to ensure one's safety and sobriety, one must limit one's world to a very small area. One must not have too many interactions with others, and not exchange too much information with others. Without interaction and exposing one's world, one didn't need to worry about what others would do to him. One didn't need to spend time to carefully analyze and observe everyone. If he really did that, he would die of exhaustion. In fact, even in the secular world, many people followed this principle of survival. As the saying goes, you may know a person's face but not his heart. People who often gave their feelings and sincerity were more likely to be hurt. If they were tired and afraid because of this kind of hurt, they would protect themselves. They only had 2 or 3 close friends. When they met strangers, they would only talk to them or just ignore them. In the eyes of others, this kind of person was indifferent and not easy to get along with. But it was indeed the best way to protect oneself. If one didn't give his feelings, it would be difficult for others to hurt him. Indifference was also a kind of barrier. But it was also cowardice in another sense. Li Yunxin used to have this kind of cowardice, but now he was trying to get rid of it. He sighed. He went to see Xie Sheng and that General Fubo. The appearance of this demon seemed to mean that the East Sea Dragon King did exist. What Lu Baishui said to him while chatting was all true. It also meant Lu Baishui. He seemed to have a closer relationship with the East Sea Dragon King. On this ship, there should be a shopkeeper of the East Sea Kingdom named Munanju. Demon. Munanju? Interesting. Hearing Lu Baishui's words, General Fubo turned his eyes to him. He stared at him up and down for a while, then waved the three-pointed double-edged sword in his hand. Instantly, a layer of mist formed between him and Xie Sheng, separating the two of them. No one doubted that this layer of mist could block. Xie Sheng didn't seem to doubt it either. So, following his usual temperament, he frowned slightly and put the 10 light swords back to his side to protect himself. He used to live in the demon's cave, so he had seen the demon's abilities. So, even though he didn't fight with people often, he could tell that this demon general's cultivation wasn't weaker than his. And they were on the sea, so he had to be careful. So he said in a low voice, "Since you are a general under the East Sea Dragon King, you should also be a general under the Shinryu. I am not an enemy of the Shinryu but an ally." But the demon general didn't even look at him. He first protected Lu Baishui, then praised, "What a beautiful person. You should be a good person. Who are you?" Li Yunxin laughed in his heart. This demon general was quite interesting. He first looked at Lu Baishui's appearance and said, "You should be a good person," then asked who he was. Lu Baishui paused for a moment, then laughed and cupped his fists. "You have good eyesight. I am Lu Fei. I have some relationship with the East Sea Dragon King. Since you are the great General Fubo under the Dragon King of the East Sea, you must be highly valued, so you should have heard of me." The demon general let out a sound of surprise. He carefully looked at him, then finally smiled. "You are Lu Fei?" "Yes. I have indeed heard of you in front of the Dragon King. You are very beautiful, you really are a good person." At first, his face was as calm as water, his lips were tightly shut, and he looked very imposing and dignified. But now when he grinned, his face was revealed. His grin was so wide that it reached his ears. His mouth was filled with sharp teeth, not the top row or the bottom row, but the entire mouth was filled with densely packed fangs. Some of the braver ones saw that he was talking to Lu Baishui in a friendly manner, so they raised their eyes to sneak a peek at him. Now that they saw his appearance, they were scared out of their wits and quickly buried their heads again. This demon general seemed to know that his mouth was scary. He just smiled, then quickly closed his mouth again. Then he turned around and frowned at Xie Sheng. "Who are you? How do you threaten a good person?" Xie Sheng took a deep breath, then slowly exhaled. He repeated what he had said before, "Since you are a general under the Dragon King of the East Sea, you should also be a general under the Shinryu." "I am an ally of the Shinryu," the demon general immediately shouted. "Hey! Who do you think you are? You don't deserve to mention the lord of the Shinryu." He raised his eyebrows and looked Xie Sheng up and down again, seeming to be angrier. "You are so ugly, you are definitely not a good person. My mistress hates ugly people the most. It doesn't matter if you are ugly but you dare to use Taoist techniques on the sea, but do you know that my mistress hates people like Daotong and Kenzo the most?" Li Yunxin laughed again. He felt his mood lighten. This demon general was really cute. If there was any conflict in the future because of what he said today, he would be spared. Xie Sheng's face was extremely ugly after being scolded by this demon general. This place was not like land. If he encountered such a situation on land, the smartest thing to do would be to run away. But now, he was surrounded by water. Even if he escaped, where would he find a boat and how would he get back to land? An emptiness realm cultivator in the vast sea was just a drop in the ocean. To him, the current situation was like a stranger to him. But something strange happened. Before this great General Fu Bo appeared, the water between the two huge ships surged violently. But just as the demon general finished his rebuttal, the surface of the sea suddenly began to shake again. Before anyone could figure out what was going on, a huge beast covered in jet black scales suddenly jumped out of the sea. It swallowed this great General Fu Bo in one gulp and then fell back into the sea. This demon general was still awe-inspiring just a breath ago. But now that he was swallowed whole, he didn't even make a sound. Everyone saw it clearly. The head of the huge beast that jumped out of the sea was as big as a huge ship, and its body was even more terrifying. When its head fell back into the sea, Its body was only halfway out of the water. As for its head, it was a dragon's head. Seawater splashed on the deck, drenching a large number of people. However, the poison that was supposed to kill upon contact had actually lost its toxicity at this moment. Not only were the mortals stunned, even Lu Baishui and Xie Sheng were stunned. Not only Lu Baishui and Xie Sheng were stunned, but even Li Yunxin was stunned. After a full 3 breaths, he widened his eyes and clenched his teeth. If that guy was in front of him now, he would definitely curse. Ninth young master, what the hell are you doing now? Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Note 1. The holy fire shines, the holy light shines. What joy is there in life, what bitterness is there in death? These 4 sentences are quotes from the online game, Sword Hero Online version 3, when the disciples of the Ming cult entered the sect. Here is the explanation. Chapter 608. It was supposed to be a good situation. He mingled with these smelly mortals just to find a chance to sneak into the Dragon Island or find out the situation around the Dragon Island. He was not some kind of perverted masochist who liked to be surrounded and questioned by a bunch of idiots. Now, a General Fubo who recognized Lu Baishui jumped out. If this demon took these 2 ships to the East Sea Dragon King, not only could he find Shangguan Yu's whereabouts, but he could also get information about the Dragon Island. Most importantly, he had been hiding his identity all along, so Lu Baishui didn't know much about him. But now he swallowed it. He had to find it from the beginning again. But Lu Baishui and Xie Sheng were at loggerheads. If this General Fubo died, there would be no turning back. Something that could have been solved perfectly. Now he had to take action and expose himself. Li Yunxin felt that he was about to become an incense burner. Smoke was coming out of his 7 orifices. He looked at Lu Baishui and Xie Sheng. They were also looking at each other. Lu Baishui didn't know what swallowed General Fubo. He clearly saw the dragon's head. Could a giant creature with a dragon's head belong to the Dragon King of the East Sea? Xie Sheng was also shocked. He also didn't know the origin of the monster that swallowed General Fubo. It might be the East Sea Dragon King. He had been with demons for more than 10 years, so he knew that some demons looked like humans and some looked like beasts. It wasn't a big deal to eat or kill a demon general under his command. Because of these uncertain guesses, neither of them moved. They looked calm on the surface, but they were looking at each other gloomily. After staring at each other for 2 seconds, Lu Baishui said in a low voice, "Take the wounded away." He was expressing his attitude. But Xie Sheng didn't seem to want this to end. He sneered, "Wait. Do you think the matter between us is over?" Lu Baishui sighed, "I advise you not to cause more trouble. When you arrive at Aquarius Bay safely, I will send you away. If you continue, I'm afraid you will lose your life. Do you still think I made up the East Sea Dragon King?" "It's just a sea beast," Xie Sheng said coldly. "Do you think you can scare me?" Lu Baishui was stunned. A wise man seeing what had just happened would have believed him. Xie Sheng looked like a smart person, but he was so stubborn at this moment. It was really puzzling. He didn't understand, but Li Yunxin did. Because he saw the dragon's head, Xie Sheng believed that this sea beast was related to dragons. Since it was related to dragons, it should be here to help him. And the facts proved that it had swallowed Great General Fubo. Lu Baishui believed that the appearance of the sea beast proved that he was familiar with the Dragon King of the East Sea. Xie Sheng also believed that the appearance of the sea beasts proved that he was indeed someone under Shinryu's protection. His organization was summoning him. With the 2 of them together, it would be a wonder if they would give up. Li Yunxin sighed, ready to stand up from the ground. At this moment, the sea rippled for the 3rd time. This time, it was far in front of the Taowu. A monstrous wave rose up, almost turning into a mountain. Not only did the wave under Great General Fubo's feet become inconspicuous splashes, even the 2 huge ships seemed to become small boats. The monstrous wave covered the sky and the earth. Even the seaweed and fish in the sea were swept up. Against the blue sky and the bright sun, it was as if there was a ferocious ghost dancing in the wave, extremely frightening. In just 2 breaths of time before anyone could react, this towering wall of water stood on the bow of the 2 ships, moving forward with the ships, but not crashing down. The reason for this was because there was a godly monarch standing on top of the wave. This godly monarch was more than 3 meters tall. He was not wearing armor, but he was still better than wearing armor, because his body was covered in black scales. Even his cheeks were covered, revealing only a pair of golden eyes. Above his golden eyes on his forehead was a pair of dark golden horns. These horns were thin but extremely long, reaching straight into the sky. It made this godly monarch seem extraordinary and disdainful. Now he stood on top of the wave. With a pair of bright eyes, he looked down at everyone on the ship and let out a thunderous voice. You still don't restrain yourself when you see me? Are you courting death? If the two of you keep arguing, I will bury you at the bottom of the sea. Behave yourselves. After saying this, the wave retreated and fiercely slammed down. Such a huge wave was enough to smash the two huge ships into pieces. However, this godly monarch seemed to only want to teach everyone a lesson, and had no intention of killing. Only the head of the wave came crashing up, but in an instant 2 of the 3 masts on the ship were broken, leaving only the main mast. The wave crashed down on the deck. The 2 huge ships shook violently as if they were about to capsize, and it took a full quarter of an hour for them to barely stabilize. But those sailors who were injured and unlucky were blown to God knows where. Presumably they had no chance of survival. The group of merchants around Li Yunxin was lucky. They were originally hiding in front of the ship. When they were blasted to the ship by the current, there was always something pulling them which saved their lives. The black-armored godly monarch on the wave came and went very fast, and he didn't even announce his name. However, the horrifying power he showed shocked Xiaosheng. Since leaving the valley, it was the first time he had met such a powerful demon. It was so powerful that it was beyond his expectation. Could such a power exist in this world? After the huge waves washed the huge ships, the mortals were busy checking the wounded and rescuing people. Even Lu Baishui had no time to be distracted. As for the cultivator, Xiaosheng looked serious. He circulated his spiritual essence and carefully checked the surroundings. Things seemed different from what he had imagined. The big demon on the wave sounded unfriendly. Didn't he come to help me? Where did he come from? Before the 2 demons showed up, he didn't notice them at all. The big demon just now gave him a terrible sense of oppression. He once again realized how dangerous this world was. Therefore, he didn't notice that little immortal Li had disappeared. In fact, Li Yunxin was still on the ship. But he was in the sealed cabin at the bottom of the ship, which he had separated for the 9th young master. The cabin was originally dark, but now the talisman lit up the place. Through the wooden planks at the bottom of the ship, he could hear a dull and distant whining sound. It seemed that it wasn't seawater but strong wind outside the cabin. Occasionally, he could hear the squeaking sound of the wood of the ship being squeezed. It seemed that this huge ship sailing on the sea was about to disintegrate at any time. Li Yunxin took a deep breath and looked at the demon standing in front of him. 9th young master, you tell me, why did you do this? Now the 9th young master showed his appearance as a demon god. He was very tall, and the pair of golden horns on his head almost pierced the cabin roof. He walked back and forth in the cabin proudly, as if he was very satisfied with his majestic appearance. Then he said, "Why did I do this? Did I do anything wrong?" Li Yunxin sighed helplessly. "After all, I owed you in my previous life. It took me a lot of effort to catch a demon general. Why did you eat him?" The 9th young master smiled, but it was hard to see it in the demon god's body. "Didn't you and Chicken Spirit say along the way that we should observe secretly, disguise ourselves, and figure out the movements of the demons on the ship? Now that such a thing has jumped out, who on the ship dares to do anything? Where do you think you can find out? In my opinion, it's a bad thing that this little demon showed up." He shook his head proudly. "I just happened to swallow him." How dare you talk about the Dragon King of the East Sea? After swallowing this little demon, the ship will be safe again. Since you don't have to show up, you can take your time to observe." Li Yunxin was stunned. He didn't expect the 9th young master to think so much. He talked to Pheasant all the way and only regarded him as a person who did things. He just felt that the 9th young master was not interested in it, so it was better to let him play and not make trouble. At that time he could deceive him. If he met Lu Baishui or Xiaosheng, he would also be at a disadvantage if he was not careful. Unexpectedly, the demon heard it and paid attention to it. Now he did this thing. It could be said that he wanted to help. Although it was not a good help. In this case it was not good to blame him. Li Yunxin sighed again. "It turns out that you don't have to worry about it. Well, it's a good intention." He shook his head again. "But next time, 9th young master, you can try to keep him alive. Or don't. If you do, use him well. It's good to take him down and interrogate him. It's also good to get some inside information." The 9th young master stood in front of Li Yunxin with his hands clasped behind his back. He snorted and laughed. "Do you think I'm a fool and can't think of it? Just watch." After saying this, he bent down and opened his mouth wide. With a wah sound, he spat out a person. His fiend god body was more than 10 feet tall. According to Li Yunxin's measurements, he was almost 4 meters tall. It was a colossus through and through. At this time, although he bent down, he was still on top of Li Yunxin's head. If he spat out again, if it weren't for Wei River Dragon King's quick reflexes that allowed him to dodge to the side, the messy things in his stomach mixed with seawater would have splashed all over his face. The one he spat out was the white-armored Great General Fu Bo. Previously, this demon was awe-inspiring, but now he was in a sorry state. The armor on his body was corroded and full of holes. Even his face was full of bloody holes. He looked like a rotten corpse. Beside him, there were some digested and undigested broken limbs and unknown bones. The demon general fell to the ground and felt dizzy. After a long time he slowly got up. He looked up and saw Li Yunxin, then the ninth young master. He immediately pointed at him, trembling. You. What kind of demon are you? You. The ninth young master didn't care about what he said. He spat a few more times on the demon's body and finished spitting out everything in his mouth. His body swayed and turned into a human wearing a white robe. I said I'm not a fool. I tasted this thing yesterday. Bah, the meat was cold. It was disgusting. If it wasn't to help you, I wouldn't even bother to swallow it. Ask me slowly. I'm leaving. Li Yunxin hurriedly said, Bah. The ninth young master ignored him. As if he was angry, he turned around and went out of the cabin. Chapter 609. Li Yunxin was stunned. He stared at the bottom of the cabin for a while and then smiled. The world was unpredictable. He met Liu Baishui in Whitewater Town. He thought that Liu Baishui was a man who was as open as a piece of white paper and intended to make friends with him like an ordinary mortal. But he didn't expect that Liu Baishui was hiding something from him. Although Liu Baishui was a real man who stuck to his Tao, and would rather die than betray Li Yunxin, but this kind of feeling was not so pure. Li Yunxin knew that he was not without fault. He was the one who hid his identity first. As he once said to Xian Shiliu, it was difficult to get a good result if you start with deception. He didn't expect that the ninth young master whom he was secretly on guard against and whom he asked Shanji to make a good impression on all the way was really thinking about him and doing things for him. After all, there was a deep hatred between them. Who could say for sure what would happen in life and how people's hearts changed? So he felt a little warm in his heart. As the saying goes, lose in the east corner, gain in the mulberry. Perhaps he might try it again cautiously. As he thought of this, he heard General Fubo on the ground suddenly let out a low roar and pounced on him. This demon was swallowed, so it was extremely afraid of the ninth young master. Now that the ninth young master had escaped through the wall, only Li Yunxin was left. Li Yunxin was a super big demon in the mysterious realm. When his aura was restrained, even a mysterious realm cultivator would find it difficult to see through him, let alone a little demon general. This demon also lost some of its mind because of the pain and torture. It didn't think that a mortal could be so fearless, so it wanted to take him down and escape. This pounce was fierce. But in the eyes of Wei River Dragon King, it was no different from an ant waving its tentacles to show off. The fiendish demon that had leaped into the air was sent flying back with a boom, smashing into the wall of the cabin. Li Yunxin felt a little better at this time. This casual strike contained several kinds of magical powers. Not only did it send him flying back, but it also strengthened the wall with its demonic power. It was as if the demon had hit an iron wall. With a bang, it was flattened into a thin pancake on the wall. Then he hooked his index finger slightly. A misty green iron chain stretched out and locked the muddle-headed soul of the demon. At this moment, he frowned slightly and waved his hand at the ground. A blue flame immediately ignited, burning all the dirty things on the ground. At the same time, he took out a talisman from his bosom and shook it, releasing a cloud of black mist. With one hand, he pointed at the demon general's soul a few times from afar. A strange talisman formation formed around him. This array formation was to temporarily ensure that the demon soul was clear-headed and not stupid. After finishing all this, he squinted at the black fog and said, Goddess Peng Lai, I'm going to interrogate this demon soul by torture. I've specially invited you to watch. Let's see what I can do if you don't tell me the truth. Goddess Peng Lai had been trapped in the talisman for more than 10 days, and it didn't feel good at all. She was only released now and her head was probably spinning, and she didn't know where she was. But since the demon had some consciousness preserved by Li Yunxin, it immediately shrank back as soon as it saw Goddess Peng Lai. It was as if it was more afraid of her than it was of the ninth young master. Goddess Peng Lai turned around and saw the great General Fubo. She immediately screamed, You! Ayaya! Hey! Kill him. These two seemed to know each other. The demon's soul became even more afraid when it heard the demoness screams. He curled up on the ground and trembled as he kowtowed, "Please spare me, your highness. Please spare me. I was possessed for a moment. Please spare me, your highness. Please spare me." He kept kowtowing as he stared at the demoness and Li Yunxin. It seemed that he was not only afraid of goddess Peng Lai, but also afraid of Li Yunxin's soul hunter strength, which could kill him with a wave of his hand. Or perhaps he thought that the demoness had found a helper. This scene made Li Yunxin frown slightly. He didn't expect this. Previously, he met Mrs. Sanhua in the temple of Mrs. Sanhua. That demon seemed to be just a little demon. Although she had secrets, her words were incoherent, and she didn't seem like an important character. Now that he thought about it, she was at most a detail or a clue. He met goddess Peng Lai, again in Whitewater Town. She seemed to have something to do with Mrs. Sanhua. It was almost the same style. She claimed to be an immortal from Mount Peng Lai, but Li Yunxin didn't take it seriously. He thought that she must have made up an identity for other purposes. Now that she was released, he wanted her to see how he would interrogate this great General Fubo, and let her think about whether she could make up her story. He didn't expect that the scene today, what she said seemed to be true. So he was a little stunned, pointed at the great General Fubo and shouted in a low voice, "Speak! Who is she?" Without thinking, the demon general kept kowtowing and immediately said, "She is the Lord of Peng Lai, the righteous god of Mount Peng Lai in the East Sea. She has been guarding the spirit mountain for thousands of years. Goddess Peng Lai, I was bewitched, she was really a goddess Peng Lai." Li Yunxin frowned again. "Go on. What evil things have you done?" The demon general hurriedly said, "I shouldn't have been bewitched by the traitor. I had no choice. Goddess couldn't protect us at that time, and the traitor claimed to be the Dragon King of the East Sea." Next he rambled on about his difficulties and begged for forgiveness. It was all cliché. But just based on these two sentences, if he was telling the truth, it all corroborated with what the demoness had said these days. She used to be the righteous god in Mount Peng Lai. Later, for some reason, her monster power gradually declined, and she was betrayed by the Dragon King of the East Sea. The demon general said that goddess Peng Lai had been in charge of Mount Peng Lai for thousands of years. Liu Baishui said that the name of the Dragon King of the East Sea had been passed down among the people for thousands of years. This meant that goddess Peng Lai was born 2,000 years ago, which also confirmed what the demoness had said to Li Yunxin before. Li Yunxin also asked her if she remembered what her real body was and who sealed her in Mount Peng Lai. But she couldn't remember anything. This was also similar to Mrs. Sanhua. The Mrs. Sanhua temple in the wild forest seemed to have been destroyed for a long time. But now when he recalled its original appearance, he realized that the temple used to cover a large area. The ruins were surrounded by towering trees. Only the area around the temple was covered in grass. There were no trees. It showed that the foundation was very good when it was built. At least it was not by mortal means. Otherwise, it couldn't have been preserved for so long. He had always been suspicious about the origin of the three flowers. Therefore, he had checked the local records, trying to find information about the Mrs. Sanhua temple. But he found nothing. It was not surprising that he found it. It would be strange if he couldn't find it. Nowadays people attached great importance to things like sacrificing gods and monsters. The Dragon King Temple of Lu Gongzan in the city of Wei even had the important responsibility of recording important things like sacrificing to the Rain Valley. If the Mrs. Sanhua temple was full of incense at that time, how could there be no information left? It could only be erased deliberately. In the Mrs. Sanhua temple, the three flowers were sculpted in the statue by the method of painting Taoism. The method of painting Taoism appeared about 2,000 years ago. This goddess Peng Lai was also born 2,000 years ago, and declined 1,000 years ago. 2,000 years and 1,000 years were extremely sensitive time points. Li Yunxin felt that he was getting closer and closer to some truth. Maybe some of the things he had mastered now were not thought of by the people behind the scenes. He shouted again, interrupting the demon general's long-winded words. "Now I ask you again. Have you ever seen a woman named Shangguanyu?" Goddess Peng Lai interrupted and screamed, "Hey!" "Of course. Didn't I tell you?" On the way, she told Li Yunxin that when Shangguanyu and her party sailed near Mount Peng Lai, there was a sudden storm. The storm was so strong that it seemed that it would not stop until the ship was overturned. Fortunately, Shangguanyu was not an ordinary person. She managed to save the ship with her supernatural power, but in the end they still crashed into the goddess Peng Lai temple in Mount Peng Lai. Hearing this, Li Yunxin felt that this female demon was talking nonsense. How could such a big ship crash into a temple? But he didn't point it out. She also said that she stayed in her palace for a long time and asked many questions. Later she learned about the rebel, and went to find the rebel, the Dragon King of the East Sea mentioned by Lu Baishui. After that, Goddess Penglai possessed Li Si and escaped from Mount Penglai. Her explanation for this was, Shangguanyu had gone to look for that traitor, so she had no choice but to expose her hiding place. Finally she found a way to leave Mount Penglai. Of course she had to run far away. Li Yunxin ignored her. He only said to the demon general, "I'm asking you." The demon general didn't dare to hesitate. He looked even more spineless and said in a trembling voice, "Yes, yes, yes. I don't know if her name is you. Last year there was indeed a woman who made trouble for the king." Speaking of this, he stole a glance at Li Yunxin. Seeing Li Yunxin's dark face, he asked, "Is that woman dead?" The demon general froze as if he was thinking about something. He said cautiously, "Goddess, is this a human being?" "What? How does he look like a human being?" "Idiot." Goddess Penglai was furious. "Do you think I'll be caught?" Bah, bah, bah. The demon general did not fawn over anyone, and his heart was about to break from fear. He kowtowed again. "Yes, yes, yes. Reporting to this monster king, that woman was looking for Maida, that traitor, to bring bad luck to her, so they fought. In the end she was defeated and imprisoned by that traitor. She is still imprisoned to this day." Li Yunxin fell silent with a gloomy face. The demon general didn't know if he had said something wrong. He looked at Goddess Penglai, but she ignored him. After a moment of silence, he walked to the demon's soul, stretched out a finger and touched his forehead. The demon general didn't know what Li Yunxin was going to do, and Goddess Penglai didn't seem to know either. "I'm here to see if you're telling the truth," Li Yunxin said in a gloomy tone. "You should blame yourself for playing these tricks in front of me at this moment." Then he crooked his finger. The demon general's soul seemed to be suddenly scattered and turned into many clouds of hazy mist, which looked like Goddess Penglai now. Li Yunxin raised his hand and grabbed, taking all the mist into his palm. In his left hand, the book of life and death given to him by Yanjun appeared. Then he slapped the mist in his palm onto it. Inside the opened book, densely packed words immediately appeared. The demon general had just asked Li Yunxin if he was a human or a demon and observed his expression. Obviously he wanted to figure out his identity before thinking about what to say. He was afraid that if he said something wrong and angered this big demon king, he would lose his soul as well. In the end he was too smart for his own good. Li Yunxin wanted to hear the truth, not happy words. Since he could see that this demon wanted to say what he wanted, he might as well break the demon's soul and search his memory carefully. The last part was for the banshee to hear. He turned around. He turned around and slowly flipped through the booklet page by page. From time to time, he raised his head and looked at Goddess Penglai meaningfully and gloomily. After flipping through 5 or 6 pages, Goddess Penglai suddenly shrunk into a small cloud of black mist and screamed in a shrill voice. "I didn't lie. Why are you looking at me? You scared me. Don't look at me." Li Yunxin sneered. Goddess Penglai didn't lie. But she didn't tell the whole truth. From the demon general's memory, the so-called Mount Penglai was indeed related to the Dragon Island. Or, it was the gateway to the Dragon Island. People said that there were 4 immortal mountains on the sea: Dragon Island, Penglai, Yingzhou, and Fanghu. These 4 mountains did exist, but their whereabouts were not fixed. Many people claimed that they saw immortal mountains and immortals. But even the descriptions of the immortal mountains in the same sea area were different. Some people said that they remembered the exact location of the immortal mountains, but later generations couldn't find them, because the 4 mountains were floating on the sea. In the demon general's memory, this Goddess Penglai was one of the demon kings that Lord Shinryu personally conferred on Mount Penglai 2,000 years ago to guard the gateway to the Dragon Island. But this memory came from a rumor. General Fubo's true body was a great white shark. He was only at the peak of the transcendent realm about 1,200 years ago. Goddess Penglai was conferred, happened before he was born. About 1,000 years ago, Goddess Penglai's demonic power suddenly weakened. She fell from the profound realm to the emptiness realm. No one knew the reason. But after all, she was conferred by Lord Shinryu. For a while no one dared to rebel. Later, a demon general under Goddess Penglai's command volunteered to go to the Dragon Island to see if something had happened to the true dragon and caused the current situation. Of course, the female demon didn't allow it. Thus the demon general sneaked away. 3 years had passed since he left. After 3 years, Everyone thought that the demon general was dead. But he came back. His cultivation had improved and he had reached the profound realm. He said that he had found out the reason for his trip to the Dragon Island. It was because of Goddess Penglai's disrespect to the true dragon that the Divine Lord was so furious that he seized her cultivation base. Now she separated her dragon power and sealed it in him. She conferred him the title of Dragon King of the East Sea, and gave him control over Mount Penglai and the East Sea. She also conferred the other 8 dragon kings to manage Yingzhou, Fanghu and the vast waters around Midland. Therefore it became a rebellion, according to Goddess Penglai. Chapter 610. After the East Sea Dragon King took over the throne, he became more magnanimous. He didn't purge anyone, but he said that he would let bygones be bygones. This great General Fubo was originally a little fiendish demon that didn't make the cut. Because he stood on the right side at the beginning, he got the title of Following the Dragon, and was asked to patrol the East Sea every day. As for Shang Guanyu, he didn't see it with his own eyes, but he heard it from the demon on Mount Penglai. But it was about 80 to 90% accurate. There shouldn't be any lies in this demon general's memory. If there was something he didn't know, it was just something he didn't know. For example, Shinryu made this goddess Penglai the demon immortal guarding the mountain. In that case, what exactly was she? Nowadays, Li Yunxin was experienced and knowledgeable. He had seen birds and beasts that had attained the Tao. He had also seen ghost cultivators. It wasn't like there weren't any stools or carrying pole spirits, and he himself was a dragon child. But he had never seen Mrs. Sanhua and Goddess Penglai. When he was with Sanhua, he thought it was because she was seriously injured and lost her mind, so she was confused. But after seeing Sanhua on Mount Yinshan, and Goddess Penglai here, he knew this kind of thing. Although they looked stupid, he understood it. Looking at the memory of this Supreme General Fubo, they were originally like this. They didn't have any trauma, they always looked crazy. What is it? Li Yunxin realized this was a key point. He suspected Mrs. Sanhua before, but he wasn't sure. Now there was Goddess Penglai in front of him. If he could get the inside story from her, maybe the curtain that had been covering him was lifted halfway. Without a doubt, Mrs. Sanhua was sent to him. The mastermind behind the scenes was most likely Mu Nanju, to protect him and to find out if he was the real Crown Prince Xie Sheng. Then this Goddess Penglai. What is her background? Which side is she on? Thinking of this, he slowly closed the book. He looked up at the female demon. The cabin was illuminated by talismans. However, it was not a bright light. Instead, it was a faint yellow flame that hung in the air. Now that he had a terrifying thought in his mind, his eyes were filled with undisguised malice. Thus, when his face was illuminated by the yellow flames, it became even more uncertain, as though he was an evil spirit. So you used to be a profound realm demon. I apologize for my rudeness. Li Yunxin looked at her maliciously as he slowly paced back and forth. This demon general's head is filled with a lot of things. But there are some things. The more he knew, the more curious he became. For example, what exactly are you? And why did the Shinryu confer you the title in the first place? If I ask you, will you answer me honestly? At this point, he had slowly walked to the front of Goddess Penglai. He had been looking through the memory of the demon general and the female monster at the same time, which scared her so much that she curled up into a ball and hid in the corner of the cabin. Now that Li Yunxin was walking in front of her, the demoness seemed to know that something was wrong. After all, she used to be a profound realm expert. After witnessing Li Yunxin's means, she immediately realized that this guy was incredible. He was at least a profound realm expert. With her current situation, what could she do when such a super demon had a bad thought? Therefore, she screamed and rose to the corner of the cabin roof. I don't know. I don't know either. But where could she hide? With a gloomy smile on his face, Li Yunxin suddenly stretched his neck like a noodle. He put his face in front of the female monster and stared at her. You said you don't know, and I don't know whether what you said is true or not. I have to break you up and see for myself. The female monster looked really scared. She immediately turned into a cloud of mist and ran around the cabin crazily, screaming, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know either. I don't know how to tell you either. You might as well just kill me. No. Don't kill me, don't kill me. I won't know even if you kill me. Li Yunxin looked at her running around crazily for a while, then suddenly retracted his neck and shouted, How many people like you are around the East Sea? The female monster shouted, I don't know. I only know that I'm alone, At this point, as if she had grasped a life-saving straw, her body suddenly stopped. I know how to get to the Dragon Island. From Mount Penglai, I know how to get there. The Dragon King of the East Sea also knows. Li Yunxin sneered and said, when I catch him, I will interrogate him slowly. Ba ba ba. The female monster spun in the air. That's because the Shinryu opened the sea ban. The Shinryu wants to let people in so he can get in. I know how to sneak in. Sneak in. Do you want to sneak in? No one knows. Li Yunxin suddenly stopped laughing, as if the female monster's words had triggered something in his mind. He thought for a while, then said, why didn't you say so earlier? The female monster looked like she was about to cry. A faint black fog was emitted from her body. I just remembered. Sealing me on the Dragon Island is to suppress something. I sneak in from there. Li Yunxin was silent for 2 breaths. Then he smiled and squinted at her. Actually, you weren't the only one in the East Sea. You guarded Mount Penglai. There were 2 others similar to you. One guarded Mount Ingzhou and the other guarded Mount Fanghu. Because the 3 mountains never appeared at the same time, this General Fubo didn't know, right? You didn't say anything about this. The female monster's body suddenly stopped. As if she was extremely surprised, she screamed, how did you know? Li Yunxin tilted his head and stared at her for a while, then said, I guessed. But it seems that I guessed right. You guys are indeed this kind of things. So that's what happened. He said this half to himself, then smiled sinisterly. Okay. I won't kill you. I'm just kidding. How could I really kill you, even if I want to die? It's not the right time yet. The black fog that the female monster turned into trembled again, as if she didn't understand that Li Yunxin was still questioning her, but now she seemed to have understood something. So she didn't want to scatter her soul. As if he knew more than her now. As if she had some kind of speculation before. But now, because of 1 or 2 points in her words, she was suddenly enlightened. That was all she could think of. Li Yunxin suddenly waved his big sleeve, and the talisman collected Goddess Penglai again. It was already noon when the merchants ran to the deck. Many things happened later, and it was already afternoon. When Li Yunxin finished dealing with the demon general and the female monster and got out of the cabin, it was already dark. The wounded were sent for treatment, but it was still unknown whether they could survive. Xie Xing went back to his cabin alone and closed the door. At this time he should be safe. The immortal lord who appeared on the waves told them not to cause any more trouble. Xie Xing should think that the immortal lord was thinking about him. This meant that the ship had reached the protection of the dragons. He could find the organization soon. Lu Baishui stayed on the deck to comfort the anxious people. He walked from the bow to the stern, directing the sailors to repair the masts and the ship buildings damaged by the waves. At this time, the 2 huge ships on the sea were brightly lit. People could be seen everywhere like a small construction site. But when Li Yunxin appeared behind Lu Baishui, it was already late at night. The sea breeze blew. The repair work came to an end. There was no one on the deck except for those on night duty. And Lu Baishui was eating in a sheltered place next to the ship building. He was eating a piece of bread with some pickled vegetables. It meant that he was sharing weal and woe with others. But there was no one around him. He leaned against the shadow and couldn't see anyone. Li Yunxin stood behind him for a while. Lu Baishui slowly swallowed the food and put down the hand holding the bread. Even so, he stood for a while and turned around. He said calmly, "Where did you go, brother Li?" At this time there was still a blood stain on his face. The bleeding had stopped, but the wound was swollen, making him look a little strange. To deal with some private matters. Li Yunxin glanced at the bread in his hand and then at his wound. "So you are Lu Fei. You know that the Dragon King of the East Sea does exist and even had some contact with him." Lu Baishui nodded and said, "I hid it from brother Li. But I have my difficulties." "I want to hear it." Lu Baishui sighed and shook his head. He looked around and found a place to sit down. "I saw that you didn't have any other thoughts. I just felt that we were on the same wavelength. Then you asked me, is she your Ling Ci? Li Yunxin was silent for a while and said stiffly, "Yes. I didn't have any suspicions about your Ling Ci. Until later. I heard about what happened in the governor's mansion." Lu Baishui smiled bitterly. "I heard that there was a young cultivator in the governor's mansion. I thought it was brotherly, so I hid it from you. I didn't expect it to be you." Li Yunxin nodded slowly. "What about you and the Dragon King of the East Sea?" "I'm just a person." Lu Baishui touched the wound on his nose gently. "It's just that the Dragon King of the East Sea is lost. There are many people like me who work for the Dragon King of the East Sea. It's an exaggeration to say that we work for him, we just collect some rare treasures on the road and offer them to him. He guarantees good weather for people like us who make a living on the sea. Brother Li. But who are you? The one on the wave. Li Yunxin nodded. I know. But it's better that you don't know about me. He was silent for a while and thought for a while. Since you are loyal, I will guarantee your safety. Since you are loyal, is it true that you are hiding in Aquarius Bay? Lu Baishui realized that Li Yunxin's tone had changed. He was not the gentle Li Yunxin from before. Instead he became cold and a little chilly. Like a knife. Maybe this was the real him. He shook his head gently again. Aquarius Bay is just a stop. In fact it's in. Li Yunxin raised her hand and interrupted him. Brother Lu. Brother Lu, I'm not here to find out where you are. I just want to tell you to leave the East Sea as soon as possible. Something big may happen here in a few days. If you leave too late, I'm afraid someone will die. Lu Baishui was stunned and wanted to frown. But as soon as he frowned, he hissed. The wound caused by Xie Sheng's lightsaber was still there. It was okay to be expressionless, but if he spoke too much, it would hurt. Brother Li, can you tell me in detail? He had to keep a straight face. Leave the East Sea. How far away? Leave the East Sea, that is, go back to land. Li Yunxin looked at him. There may be a war in the East Sea. War? Oh, with whom? Li Yunxin stared at Lu Baishui for a while and smiled. The dragon that jumped out of the sea during the day is my cousin. If you want to talk about a war, it's with the Dragon King of the East Sea. Lu Baishui suddenly opened his eyes wide and took a step back. Brother Li, the person I'm looking for is with the Dragon King of the East Sea. Of course, I'm going to find trouble with him. Li Yunxin said in a low voice. Brother Lu, take care of yourself. After saying this, he turned around and disappeared in the air. Lu Baishui still stood there, stunned and speechless. Although he had many ideas, he still couldn't accept the fact that Li Yunxin, who looked like a human being, was a demon. And if he didn't lie, he was a big demon who thought he could compete with the Dragon King of the East Sea. However, such an identity could not be matched with the Li Yunxin that he had seen, no matter how he looked at it. He stood in the shadow in a daze, listening to the sea breeze blowing in his ears. After standing like this for a long time, he heard something else. Footsteps. The brothers on duty were also walking. But these were obviously not the footsteps of his people. The person walking should be good at martial arts and could barely be regarded as a second-rate master. Now he was walking cautiously in front and behind him. There must be something unspeakable about someone walking like this. It was ridiculous. Just a moment ago he was thinking about the East Sea, the Dragon King of the East Sea, and Brother Li, who might be a big demon. But now, the footsteps of ordinary people, which were insignificant to those existences, startled him again. Lu Baishui felt that his brain was a bit numb. Too many things had happened on this ship that were beyond common sense. Now all of them came back to him. He felt that his feeling before he went out to sea was correct. There was a big whirlpool. And he was falling deeper and deeper into this whirlpool. He sighed inwardly and told himself to move forward cautiously to look at the man. The ship was very long, and so was the ship's building. Although it was divided into 3 floors, each floor was not a whole space, but was divided into small rooms like a house on land. He was now near the bow of the ship, looking at the belly of the ship, and saw a woman. It was very dark on the deck. He couldn't see her face clearly. But there was only one woman on this ship, Pan He. Her footsteps were light, and her movements were agile. She raised her hand to touch the railing, and silently jumped to the 2nd floor. Lu Baishui sighed in his heart for the umpteenth time. It seemed that something was going to happen again. Now, after seeing what happened during the day and hearing what Li Yunxin said, even a man like him felt powerless in his heart. This was not a matter of being depressed and dispirited, but knowing that there were some things that he really couldn't do. For example, if the demons really fought on the sea, what could he do? This trip to the sea was to do his own things and also to solve some problems. He didn't expect that now. He was the incidental thing in other people's eyes. His brother Li and Xie Sheng seemed to be out of his control. Now this woman had jumped out. He had a hunch that the things that happened to this woman after her death might not be something that he could control. But there were hundreds of his brothers on the ship. If he didn't bite the bullet and go to sea, who would? Lu Baishui shook his head and his figure also rose in the night, going to the 2nd floor. Chapter 6:11. Now there was only one person living on the 2nd floor. Xie Sheng. At the same time that Lu Baishui noticed Pan He's movement, Li Yunxin also noticed it. He was now standing on the top of the main mast that hadn't been broken. The huge ship became smaller under him, and the open sails swelled in the sea breeze. As far as his eyes could see, he could only see the boundless sea. The sea was sparkling under the moonlight, as if the ship was sailing on the back of a giant dragon. Pan He's every move was in his perception. Even if this woman was a martial arts master compared to mortals, her voice was still too loud in the perception of a mysterious realm monster. Her feet stepped on the wooden planks, her palms touched the wall, and she gently exhaled. All these were heard by Li Yunxin, and he made precise movements. He asked Pheasant to erase Pan He's memory of that night, but he didn't get rid of her, because he wanted to let her doubt ferment in her heart. This woman was not smart in his eyes, but she was not stupid among mortals. A Freemason in charge of the Donghai nation suddenly lost her memory on the ship, and her wrist was broken. She should know that someone had done something to her. Someone did something to her but didn't kill her and just didn't let her remember. Maybe this person was not completely hostile. It was possible that they were on the same side in some ways. It was just that she didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth and provoked him, so he attacked her. So this not completely hostile person, in Pan He's opinion, who could it be? It could only be the Donghai nation's Grand Manager of Nanmuju. This time, Li Yunxin came to the sea to use these two ships as isolation cabins. If he could get rid of the last tail of Nanmuju and the Freemasonry, he would really disappear from their control. However, he found the Freemasonry but not the Nanmuju. He was a mysterious realm monster and he was powerful but not omnipotent. Since he couldn't find them, the Freemasonry, who had been dealing with Nanmuju for hundreds of years, should be able to do it better than him. He spared Pan He's life and only erased the memory of that night because of this. He asked her to find the Grand Manager for him. Unexpectedly, her gun was useless. He had been paranoid for a few days, but he still couldn't get anything done. It seemed that either the shopkeeper was not on the ship, or he had hidden himself too well. Li Yunxin sighed. These people from the new Freemasonry were really useless. Only Shanji, the ninth young master, and Lu Baishui knew his real identity. Xie Xing knew that there were people stronger than him in the sea, but he didn't seem to think that they were enemies. The ninth young master had made a smart move by appearing on the waves during the day, so that the people on the ship would be on their guard and not cause any more trouble, but it did not frighten them. Xie Xing was meditating in the cabin just like he did a few days ago. Li Yunxin closed his eyes and carefully observed. Sometimes, like now, when he was close to Xie Xing and there were not many people around, he could sense the qi activity that Xie Xing exuded when he was cultivating. Just by looking at one spot, one would be able to tell the whole picture. Thus, one could estimate Xie Xing's cultivation progress and speed. The cultivation speed of this true prince could be said to be 1,000 miles a day. He seemed to have a treasure in his hand. The spiritual qi on the treasure was not worth mentioning for Li Yunxin's realm, but it was useful for Xie Xing's cultivation. Tonight, his qi activity was a little unstable. Li Yunxin seemed to have reached a critical juncture in his cultivation, and even showed signs of qigong deviation occasionally. But the golden light method that Xie Xing cultivated was given by him. From a certain point of view, Li Yunxin's cultivation foundation, especially for some basic things, was excellent. He had also glanced at the golden light technique. The contents were too shallow for him, so he was well aware of what might happen when he cultivated it. Because of this, he felt it was a little strange. Xie Xing should not show signs of qigong deviation at this juncture. The other strange thing was Pan He. The smell of this woman tonight was a little special. Li Yunxin didn't look at her. Instead, he was smelling and listening. So tonight she smelled more fragrant than usual. He stood on the top of the mast, frowned and thought for a while. Suddenly he understood. So he drew a circle in the void in front of him, and the scene he wanted to see appeared in the circle. This method, called round light mirror, was convenient, but it had to be used with caution. If Xie Xing's breath was not chaotic tonight, it was very likely that he would be found out. Then he saw, Xie Xing was wearing only his underclothes, sitting cross-legged in the cabin. His eyes were closed, as if he had reached a bottleneck in his cultivation. At this time, Pan He had walked to the door of Xie Xing's room. Lu Baishui was watching from the other side of the second floor, trying to figure out what Pan He was going to do. But he was just a mortal after all and could only see the vague appearance. Pan He stopped in front of the door and made a strange move. She combed her hair. Normally, she should have been vigilant when she was lurking here at night. But now she combed her hair as if she was going to see her lover. Then the woman tugged at her collar again. She opened her collar a little, revealing her chest. Pan He was bought by Wu Jiasong. In this era she was called a beautiful middle-aged woman, but in the era of Li Yunxin she was actually only a beautiful 24 or 25 years old woman. She had a fair complexion, and as she pulled, her snow-white breasts looked a little soul-stirring under the moonlight. Li Yunxin snorted with interest. He saw Pan He reach out her hand and do something on the door, and it opened. As soon as the door opened, she immediately dashed in and closed the door. Such a sound could not be hidden from Xie Sheng's ears. He immediately opened his eyes on the bed, and stared at the woman at the door with bright eyes. The cabin he was in was quite large, and Pan He was more than 10 steps away from him. There were only 3 candles in the cabin, and the light from them was limited. Therefore, even with Xie Sheng's current cultivation, he could only see the appearance of the woman. He seemed to be prepared for this. He gloomily stared at Pan He for 2 breaths and said in a low voice, "Who are you?" Li Yunxin noticed that he began to circulate his qi. Spiritual energy filled his body, ready to attack at any time. But Pan He laughed lightly. It was the kind of laughter that a woman would make intentionally, and it was completely different from normal laughter. Even her voice became sweet. "I'm the incense holder, I'm here to deliver incense to Taoist priest." The last 2 words were enunciated lightly and dragged out. Her tone was tactful and full of provocation. It was as if the atmosphere in the room had suddenly become too sweet. As she spoke, she stared at Xie Sheng and slowly walked towards him. When she took the first step, Xie Sheng didn't say anything and didn't stop her. It was as if he wanted to see what she was going to do. When she took the second step, Pan He pulled open her belt. The soft silk belt slid down and fell on her outstretched thighs. And because the belt was pulled open, her snow-white and round thighs were faintly visible. She wasn't wearing underwear. The unique fragrance of a woman's body spread in the room. Xie Sheng slightly frowned but still didn't say anything. So Pan He took the third step. The silk belt on her thighs slid down, and so did her outer robe. So a delicate female body with only a light pink doo-doo was exposed in the room. It was winter, and although the temperature on the sea was getting warmer, people still wore quite a lot of clothes. In this era, there was no 3-dimensional tailoring, so the graceful figure of a woman was hidden under the loose clothes. Therefore, when she took off her outer robe and revealed her snow-white slender legs, smooth collarbones and round and towering breasts, she finally understood why Wu Jiasong had bought her in the first place. The body hidden under her clothes was rare and wonderful in this era. So she took another 3 steps. Pan He walked to the candlestick on the table. Xie Sheng finally saw her face clearly. His eyebrows gradually relaxed and he squinted his eyes, and finally said the second sentence, "What do you want?" Pan He stopped in her tracks and gently covered her chest with her bandaged hand. Her doo-doo was very small and thin. Because of the cold, a slight bulge could be seen. At this time, when she covered it with her hand, it had a different effect. She pressed the doo-doo down a little and her chest was even more aroused. And her flat snow-white lower abdomen was also exposed, reflecting the enchanting undulations in the candlelight. This kind of provocative posture made her voice even more seductive. "Taoist priest, do you want me after asking clearly, or do you want me, then ask?" Xie Sheng's eyes narrowed even more. He stared at Pan He for about 3 or 4 seconds and then said, "Take it off." His voice was a little hoarse. Pan He put her hand down. "In your body." Pan He smiled and pulled the back of her neck with her left hand. The last piece of clothing on her seductive body fell to the ground, completely exposing her beautiful body in front of Xie Sheng. Li Yunxin laughed. Xie Sheng's throat moved. After 2 breaths, he suddenly raised his hands, and from his sleeves scattered 6 or 7 golden talismans. They fell on the ground, the ceiling and the wall, protecting the room. Then he shouted in a low voice, "Come here." At this time, his voice was full of desire, even slightly trembling. Pan He twisted her waist and slowly walked over, but Xie Sheng had already waved his hand again. This snow-white body was pulled into his arms by an invisible force. The cultivator turned into a fierce beast in an instant, and his clothes were also taken off. 2 fiery bodies immediately tangled together. Pan He first let out a coquettish exclamation, and then she let out an uncontrollable moan. Then there was the sound of continuous panting. The huge ship was still moving in the night wind. Lu Baishui didn't know what happened in the cabin. Xie Sheng's talismans isolated the cabin, and mortals couldn't hear any sound. But Li Yunxin was still standing on the top of the mast, watching intently. After about a dozen breaths of time, Pan He was pressed onto the bed, and the first battle quickly ended. However, Xie Sheng was full of fighting spirit and soon he started the second round. This time it took a little longer, about 10 breaths. Then he started the third round without stopping. Pan he was good in bed and she was flirtatious and flirtatious. Xie Sheng was also a cultivator and he was full of energy. The first 2 times he held it in for a long time and after a hasty end he finally got into the mood. This time it took nearly an hour. When it came to the 4th round, Pan he finally began to beg for mercy. However, begging for mercy was also like provocation. It made Xie Sheng, who had been silent all this while and only knew how to work hard, collide even more fiercely. Li Yunxin narrowed his eyes, and he knew why Xie Sheng's previous cultivation went wrong. 2 mortals. One was strong and the other was weak. Generally speaking, the stronger one had more desire in some aspects than the weaker one, let alone cultivators. Cultivation, the essence, qi and spirit. The true fire of Yuan Yang grew stronger with the health of the essence, qi and spirit. Without good guidance it would be difficult to suppress. At least before Li Yunxin turned 14, Li Chunfeng and Shang Guanyu had been guiding him in cultivation. Unknowingly they had helped him resolve this difficulty, and prevented him from burning like Xie Sheng. It was a pity that Xie Sheng started to cultivate the golden light method that Li Yunxin gave him. However, as mentioned earlier, the path of cultivation was very dangerous. It was not like the secular martial arts he learned in the grotto. Without guidance he ended up like this. But this was only part of the reason. The other part, this was probably a fact that every transmigrator couldn't avoid, coming to a world with the mentality of a game, and having martial arts that could override all living beings. If that person was originally interested in certain aspects and had a strong need for it, he had been cooped up in the deep mountains for more than 10 years. Now, on this relatively safe sea, he encountered an advantage that came knocking on his door, and he thought that in this world, he had the absolute ability to ensure his own safety and control the situation. Naturally, he didn't care. He would eat the meat first. Therefore, when the 5th round of fierce attacks began, Pan He's body was really limp, and she really didn't have the strength to speak anymore. She really closed her eyes in pain, and she wanted to struggle to push Xie Sheng away, but she couldn't use any strength at all. Li Yunxin sneered coldly. When this woman found him before, he thought that she only had petty tricks. Now it seemed, she really only had petty tricks. She should have thought of some of the things that Li Yunxin thought of. Perhaps because of her observation of Xie Sheng these days, she followed some clues and found out about his preferences and desires. Therefore this time she planned to use a direct and forceful method to obtain a channel for deep communication. Unexpectedly, she overestimated her own worth. Xie Sheng was a native of this world, but he was a transmigrator. Just like when Li Yunxin came into this world, he didn't completely treat the people of this world as human. He was afraid that this woman would be in danger tonight. Just when Li Yunxin was thinking whether or not to interrupt Xie Sheng's good deed that had lasted for nearly 4 hours, he found another person. That person had run to the deck from the lower cabin, and now, without saying a word, he went straight to the 2nd floor of the ship. His footsteps were a little heavy and he seemed to be in a bad mood. Li Yunxin squinted his eyes and looked. It was Wu Jiasong. He laughed and temporarily gave up on the idea of making a move. He found that Wu Jiasong had walked to the 2nd floor, to the door of Xie Sheng's cabin. After a slight hesitation, he slowly moved closer and put his ear on the door to listen. Naturally, he couldn't hear anything. After being stunned for a while, he turned around. But he didn't leave. With his hands in his sleeves, he sat against the wall beside the door. It seemed that he wanted to wait. Chapter 6:12. At this time Lu Baishui was waiting. Unexpectedly, his patience was also very good. Or maybe he couldn't fall asleep anyway. He sat in the corner of the 2nd floor with his eyes half closed. For as long as 4 hours, whenever a member of the crew on night duty was seen, a low whistle, like the sound of the wind, was used to signal them to retreat. Thus, when Xie Sheng's 5th round of fierce attacks ended and Pan He completely fainted, it had been almost 4 hours. In the cabin, Xie Sheng climbed up from the soft body. Half of the bed had collapsed. He was an emptiness realm expert and had a strong body, so he didn't care. However, Pan He's back was pressed against the broken stubble of the bed. Although there was a blanket as a barrier, it was still penetrated by the broken stubble in the waves of violent collisions. As a result, the bedding under her was now a patch of blood red. Presumably, her back was also badly mutilated. Xie Sheng glanced at Pan He's naked and twisted body. He walked to the table in the room, picked up a pot of herbal tea and drank it in one gulp. After burping, he threw the teapot away and picked up the satin belt that Pan He hung on the table to wipe his hands. Then he turned around and said, "Tell me. What do you want?" Right now, Pan He was in a delicate situation between being on the verge of death and being on the brink of death. She could feel that her life was slowly slipping away, but she was still conscious enough to hear Xie Sheng's words. Therefore she realized one thing. This person didn't just vent on her. He asked her, "What do you want?" because he wanted her to be on the verge of death. She had no doubt that if her answer didn't satisfy him, she would die in such an undignified way. Although she knew that this would be dangerous, she still had a strange feeling. She vaguely felt that she had failed somewhere before. She always failed. This vague thought gave her a strong feeling of unwillingness. But when was the last time? Her gaze became a little unfocused. However, Xie Sheng's snort pulled her back to reality. "Don't talk. Are you really here to die?" She slowly squeezed out a weak voice. "Taoist? Priest? You must be joking. Of course it's—" At this point he suddenly coughed as if he was coughing up blood. But when he raised his head he choked on the blood. Blood spurted out from his mouth and his face turned green. He used all his strength to raise his hand and stared at Xie Sheng with wide eyes. Xie Sheng stared at her coldly for 2 or 3 breaths. His eyes roamed over her body again, as if he was wondering if this body was still suitable for him to use. After pondering for a moment, Zhang Xian sneered coldly and flipped his hand. Pan He's body flipped over and he spat out a mouthful of blood. He coughed violently a few times before he could speak again. Thank you, Taoist priest." As he said this, he tried his best to smile. Unfortunately, his mouth was full of blood, so his smile was not pleasant. Xie Sheng looked at her and sneered, "You really are a bitch." After saying this, he summoned his inner clothes and slowly put them on. As he tied the belt, he sneered, "But I like it. I'll spare your life. Take your time." With that, he walked to the half-collapsed bed. He stretched his hand to the side of the bed and took out a green pill from his Taoist robe. He turned around, pried open Pan He's mouth and stuffed the pill inside. But this pill was as big as a pigeon's egg. How could Pan He swallow it at this moment? Moreover, her throat was injured earlier, so her face immediately showed a painful expression. Li Yunxin had been watching from the beginning to the end. At this time he knew what this pill was. All cultivators had to dabble in alchemy. Although he was not very good at it, in front of Xie Sheng he should be a decent student. He knew that this green pill was called the elemental brew pill. It was used as a catalyst to refine more advanced pills. It was considered a semi-finished product, a prototype. Ordinary cultivators didn't care about it. They didn't even want to eat it. This Xie Sheng should have gotten it from the governor's office. But he carried it with him. It was too shabby. He grew up under the attention of Li Chunfeng and Shang Guanyu for more than 10 years. He didn't think there was anything special about it. But after seeing Xie Sheng these days, seeing such a person who really had no one to watch over him and start cultivating from nothing, he realized how difficult it was and how dangerous it was. When he was young, he would occasionally play with it like a marble. But in Xie Sheng's hands it became a treasure. Xie Sheng stuffed the treasure into Pan He's mouth, then pulled her messy hair and sat her up. He put a palm on her shoulder and said coldly, "I stuffed a pill in your mouth. You mortals can't bear this kind of immortal medicine. If you really swallow it, you'll either die from bloating or die from spiritual power. You need me to circulate my energy to help you digest it. Only then will you be able to bear it and keep your life. It will also heal your injuries. Now, I ask you one question and you answer one." Xie Sheng said coldly, "If you tell half a lie, I'll hang you on the mast like this." Pan He's mouth was stuffed, so she could only make muffled sounds in response. So Xie Sheng thought for 3 breaths and asked the first question, "Are you a member of the Freemasonry?" Pan He was startled. And Li Yunxin, who was at the top of the mast, let out a ha with interest. He had been standing and didn't feel tired. But at this time he seemed to be interested in watching a show. He first waved his hand and summoned a cloud under him. Then he touched the void, found a chair and sat down. Then he rubbed his palm on the little finger of his left hand. There was a golden pill in his palm. This thing was called Red Heaven Golden Pill. First, he used the essence brewing pill, that Xie Sheng regarded as a treasure to refine a furnace of red pill. Then he used the red pill and other natural treasures to refine 9 heaven powder. This 9 heaven powder was nourished in a fine gold furnace for 300 years, and then combined with some other treasures to refine Red Heaven Pill. Once the Red Heaven Pill was done, it would take 16 years and 9 months to refine it into a Red Heaven Golden Pill. In order to refine a Scarlet Firmament Gold Pill, it would take about 400 years, using hundreds of Origin brewing pills as a primer. and supplemented with all kinds of heavenly treasures that were worth hundreds of thousands of origin brewing pills. He had about 15 or 16 of these pills in his hand. They were glistening yellow and golden, about the size of a broad bean. Because of the refining method, there was a kind of wonderful smoke, very much like the pot gas that ordinary people talked about when cooking. Li Yunxin picked one up and threw it into his mouth. While looking at the scene in the mirror, he chewed noisily. Eating this pill like this was a waste of its medicinal properties, just like the pills he ate on Cloud Mountain to replenish the demon power in his body. But now he liked the taste of this pill. When he was a human, the only things he could eat were grains and miscellaneous foods. Now that he was a demon, his steel teeth were indestructible, and he felt that his menu of food had suddenly expanded. Eating. It was nothing more than the taste and texture of the food. No matter how crispy the food was, could it be as crispy as roasted pebbles? Just this one bite was probably equivalent to eating the wealth of a country. If a red heaven golden pill was given to a human emperor, that emperor would probably want to exchange the whole empire for it. When he ate such an astonishingly valuable snack, Xie Sheng was smiling in the room. So it's true. This sentence he didn't ask Pan He to answer. She seemed to already know. You are just tools that can move and talk. You don't deserve to play tricks with me. After saying this, his palm released a little spiritual power. Then he asked Pan He to absorb some of the essence brewing pill. The woman's face immediately had a healthy color. His aura had also calmed down from its weak state. She clenched her teeth and said in a low voice, Daoist Xie. Xie Sheng snorted coldly, I'll ask you a second time, who is the biggest enemy of your Freemasonry in this world? When Li Yunxin, who was watching the show from the clouds, heard this sentence, his body slightly leaned forward. He seemed to be nervous. He even put down the second red heaven golden pill that he was about to put into his mouth. He already knew this woman Pan He. This woman was a little smart and ambitious. She met a good opportunity to take the position, and felt that she had a chance to advance. So she had the drive to risk her life. First she dared to look for him, then she dared to look for Xie Sheng. And she didn't see herself as a human. And as Xie Sheng said, she really treated herself as a tool. What happened tonight was proof of that. Even when this woman was on the verge of death and was badly mutilated, she still wanted to smile for Xie Sheng to see. She was extremely ruthless. She was extremely ruthless to herself and others. If she wasn't so stupid, she was actually very similar to Li Yunxin himself. Because Pan He was this kind of person. So Li Yunxin could guess what she would say. She originally wanted to tell Xie Sheng that Shinryu is the sky demon. Because they, the members of the new Freemasonry who only knew part of the truth, still thought that the so-called Great Calamity was really some invasion of the sky demon. They should also know that the origin of this child from heaven was related to the elders of Cloud Mountain. Since they were related, they should be in the same camp. And Xie Sheng asked her, who is the enemy of the Freemasonry? According to Li Yunxin's speculation, he probably wanted to use this question to indirectly confirm his own guess. This Xie Sheng was extremely smart. So he knew the strategy of asking questions. To get the answer to a question, it was best not to directly ask the question. Also, don't listen to the enemy's unnecessary details and nonsense. Because those details and nonsense might be misleading. Only ask what you want to hear, then integrate the results and compare them. This was the best way to get the truth in a situation where there was too much information. The enemy of the Freemasonry was naturally the organization that he belonged to, the organization that belonged to Art St. Qinzhao. And Pan He, this woman who wasn't afraid of death and also wanted to take the position, would not obediently surrender at this time. She would definitely want to try and achieve her goal. So she would say, it's Shinryu, Li Yunxin said softly, staring straight at Pan He. It's Shinryu, Pan He said softly without any hesitation. Ha! Li Yunxin leaned back in his chair and tossed the second jindan into his mouth. She still wanted to lure Xie Sheng, the child from heaven, to cause trouble for the Shinryu and achieve their goal. Hearing her answer, Xie Sheng was silent for a while. It was indeed the answer he wanted. The god of Shinryu was the leader of the Little Demon Protection. For him, he believed that the Little Demon Protection created by the Shinryu was the organization that he should find. And his organization was the enemy of the Freemasonry. Pan He's answer indeed supported his point of view. And for him, there was indeed a factor that Li Yunxin didn't know that made him believe in this. He asked the second question just to see if Pan He would start telling the truth, since he thought he already knew the answer. In fact, Pan He lied. But Xie Sheng believed that what Pan He said was true. This was the part that made Li Yunxin the happiest and most excited. At this time, such an interesting thing was rare. The two people with ulterior motives, because the information they had was limited, they both thought that they knew everything. They said their own lies, but in the end, it became the truth in each other's ears, and made each other even more certain of their own thoughts. Li Yunxin slapped his thigh and laughed. Although his laughter was blocked by the barrier that he cast and no one could hear it, he still felt that it was extremely amusing and carefree. Halfway through his laughter, he suddenly stopped laughing and snorted coldly. Back then, when Su Yusong and Zhuomuxia saw him being played around by all kinds of fake news, they probably laughed like this too. Those two bastards. Fortunately, there was nothing left of them. Li Yunxin snorted again, threw the third jindan into his mouth and chewed it fiercely. Since Xie Xing got the answer he wanted, after a moment of silence, his expression became slightly relaxed. He circulated qi in his palm again. Pan he let out a moan. The wounds on her back and lower body began to heal slowly. But at the same time, it was extremely itchy and she couldn't help but moan a few more times. These moans seemed to arouse Xie Xing's interest. But at least he knew that he was doing something serious now. He only reached out his other hand to Pan He's chest and fiercely pinched it a few times. As he played with it, he said, "At least you knew your place and told the truth. Let me ask you again, is there anyone else like you on this ship?" "Other people like you?" Li Yunxin knew that Xie Xing was referring to people like Mu Nanju and the Freemasonry. He only knew about Mu Nanju after he went to Rong City in the state of Yu. This Xie Xing should not know about it now. It was best not to tell him. So Li Yunxin's fingers moved, and he was finally ready to interrupt their conversation. But then he stopped, because someone else moved. It was Pan He's husband, Wu Jiasong, who was sitting outside Xie Xing's vault, waiting in the cold wind for a long time. At this time, he finally couldn't wait any longer. He gritted his teeth and muttered something. He suddenly stood up, turned around and was about to smash the door. But when his aggressive hand was about to touch the door, he stopped, as if he was hesitating. After hesitating for about 2 or 3 breaths, he fiercely stamped his feet. He lightly knocked a few times. In the room, Xie Xing's words were interrupted by the sound of knocking on the door. He was not in a hurry to ask. Instead, he sneered and put more force into his hand. "Ha! Your man has been waiting outside for a few hours. Do you want to call him in?" Chapter 613. Pan He was about to speak, but Xie Xing wasn't asking for her opinion. She didn't know what he was thinking. He suddenly exerted force in his palm and dissolved half of the elemental brew pill in her mouth. The wounds on Pan He's body healed quickly. It only took 2 or 3 breaths. The scabs on the surface of her body fell off. She returned to her fair, delicate and fragrant appearance a few hours ago. Seeing her like this, Xie Xing laughed repeatedly. He waved his hand to undo the restriction in the cabin and said in a low voice, "Who is it?" Wu Jiasong had been knocking outside the cabin for a while. Now that he finally heard someone's voice, he was stunned. When Xie Xing shouted, "Speak," again he hurriedly said, "My Taoist priest's room is..." Xie Xing looked at Pan He. This woman had recovered her strength. Hearing their conversation, she was about to pick up her clothes on the ground. However, her pair of jade rabbits were in Xie Xing's hands, so she didn't dare to get up and walk away. She only tried to move a little, but Xie Xing pulled her into his arms and pinched her with his fingers. He squinted his eyes evilly and waved his hand again. The cabin door opened silently. "Your wife." He squinted at Wu Jiasong, who was standing at the cabin door with his hands still in the air. "Your wife is not bad. What's the matter?" This ugly and lewd scene unfolded in front of Wu Jiasong. His wife was naked and in Taoist priest Xie's arms. Her hair was messy and her skin was flushed. Even the bed was half collapsed. There was still a certain smell in the room. How could he not know what had happened in the past few hours? Pan He wanted to lower her head and turn around. However, she couldn't move because of Xie Xing's hand. Wu Jiasong could only see her clearly. He raised his head and put on a calm expression. "What are you doing here? Go back." Wu Jiasong stared at the two of them and his expression froze. He seemed to have turned into a puppet. He could only move after 2 or 3 breaths. At first, he seemed to listen to Pan He and subconsciously took a step back. But then he stopped, widened his eyes and pointed at Xie Xing. His lips trembled. "You." Xie Xing tilted his head. "That was right. It was your wife who delivered herself to our doorstep. Why do you want to play too?" Hearing this, Wu Jiasong still said, You. After saying these 3 words, he spat out a mouthful of blood. Pan He opened her mouth as if she wanted to scream, but she swallowed it back. Xie Xing snorted in disappointment. He raised his hand and pinched Pan He's face, taking out the origin brew pill that had already become smaller. He pushed her away and said with a frown, "Don't be an eyesore here. Get him out of here." Pan He was startled. She hurriedly picked up her clothes from the ground, put them on, tied them up and ran to help Wu Jiasong up. Xie Xing said coldly, "Come back tonight." Li Yunxin watched all of this from the sky. When he saw this, he let out a soft, "Eh?" Because when Xie Xing toyed with Pan He and now humiliated Wu Jiasong, he could understand and experience a little. However, he had never experienced Wu Jiasong's emotional state before. It was hard for him to imagine what kind of feeling it was. To him, this was a novelty. He frowned and pondered for a while, then shook his head. He thought about it. Although it was a novelty to him, it shouldn't be comfortable. It was better for him not to try it. But because he couldn't experience empathy more deeply, he didn't have too much sympathy for Wu Jiasong's experience. Instead, he understood Xie Xing better. This person was also a pervert. He had seen too many perverts in this world. First of all, he himself was one. Those demons and cultivators, from a human's point of view, were all perverts. His situation didn't need to be mentioned. It was because of physiological reasons in his previous life, and a strange experience that led to an extremely special psychological condition, which was brought to this life. Although he had already begun to strive to be a normal person in this life, there was still a long way to go to reach his goal. Otherwise, which normal person would be watching here in high spirits? Those demons and cultivators, due to their own reasons, all had incomplete emotions and were similarly strange. And this Xie Xing, when Li Yunxin first saw him, he felt that this person was also quite enigmatic. Calm, steady, smart and scheming. According to this evaluation, he really shouldn't have let Pan He into the house tonight. Even if he entered the house, he shouldn't have let Pan He into his bed. Impulsive lust would cause people to let down their guard, and they might accidentally reveal key information. But this guy was different. Not only did he have a big fight, but he also seemed to have a very heavy taste. This made Li Yunxin puzzled. He originally thought that before he came here, his identity should be relatively special, and he should have received training. Perhaps he was similar to a secret agent in his world. If he was an ordinary person because of a soul with the memories and lust of an adult, in the body of a young man in his teens, and suppressed in the deep mountains for more than 10 years. At this time, there was a beautiful woman who took the initiative to come to him, and he did have the ability and capital to do whatever he wanted. Li Yunxin wouldn't be surprised to do what he did tonight. But in a situation where he seemed to have received training, and knew that the environment around him is not very peaceful, it was really too unprofessional to first vent his lust before asking. No powerful character that Li Yunxin knew would do such a thing. There were probably 2 possibilities for this situation. One possibility was that this person himself had such a personality defect. But Li Yunxin knew that his body seemed to carry important information, and it was fixed to be projected here from another world. It was not a wise choice to use a carrier with such a terrible defect to carry important information. The mastermind behind the scenes who had the ability to achieve such a goal shouldn't be stupid enough to make such a mistake. The other possibility was that he seemed to have never seen a woman before. Or it could be said that the place he came from had very few opportunities to contact women, and his lust was also strongly restrained. On this point, Li Yunxin could see some clues from his first 2 rounds. Because his new body couldn't adapt well to strong stimulation, it was normal for him to be a quick shooter twice. But his jerky movements at the beginning were not normal. He seemed to have, indeed had no such experience. So he covered it up with an attitude of arrogance and indifference, and with Pan He's flattery and intentional guidance, he quickly got into the mood. Then, like a child who got a new toy, he couldn't stop playing. These thoughts flashed through his mind in the blink of an eye. At this moment he remembered many things from the past, some things that he didn't find strange in the past, but now compared with Xie Xing's situation he finally found some clues. Li Chunfeng and Shang Guanyu sometimes talked about women. In the past he felt that he was pretending to be a child and neither of them could tell. Now he knew that both sides were acting. He was pretending to be a child and the two were pretending to be his parents. They were observing in the dark. Sometimes, they would inadvertently talk about things between men and women. It wasn't any hardcore content. It was just some questions about love. And they might have deliberately led him to express his views, in a way that would make his parents laugh. Now that he thought about it, if there was a soul hiding in this body with normal desires and normal experiences, under their guidance, he would unintentionally express some views that were normal and not strange compared with his current identity. But Li Yunxin wasn't a normal person, so he couldn't say any normal views. Now that he thought about it, if it was this Xie Sheng, he probably couldn't say it either. It seemed that because of this, in the eyes of Li Chunfeng and Shang Guanyu, his identity became more appropriate. It could be counted as a coincidence. But if he used these details as evidence, he should also draw a conclusion. His second inference about Xie Sheng was correct. In the other world he came from, there were very few opportunities to interact with women. He used the idea of that world. Because he had always been faintly aware, and tonight, because of Xie Sheng, he finally confirmed one thing: the world that Xie Sheng and the elders used to belong to, it wasn't the world that he was familiar with, the world that he came from. As a result, he found the answers to many questions that had puzzled him before. Bai Yanjun once took him to a space of nothingness and said some strange things to him. He meant that if Li Yunxin was the person they were looking for, he should be able to understand what he said. But he couldn't understand, he could only perfunctorily bluff his way through. That was the first time he suspected that there was another real crown prince. Then he went to Cloud Mountain and asked Grandpa D 2 questions. But Grandpa D immediately lost interest in him and saw through his identity. Li Yunxin thought he was a smart person. He wouldn't be so stupid as to carefully prepare 2 questions, but the more he asked, the worse it would get. Now he understood that it wasn't that he was crazy. It was that Grandpa D and he didn't belong to the same world, so naturally no matter how he asked, it would get him into trouble. It was also at that time that he began to suspect that there was not only another real crown prince, but also another world. That world should also have a highly developed civilization. It might even be more developed than where he came from. In his previous life he had heard of the so-called March 18th incident. It was said that an unbelievably advanced and mysterious fleet of aircrafts had appeared in his old country. And now, did they also come from the original world where Xie Sheng and the elders were? Then what about Chen Zhao the painting saint? She had left all kinds of details in this world. It was because of those details that Li Yunxin had a preconceived notion that Chen Zhao and the elders should come from the same world as him. Then Chen Zhao, where did he come from? Apart from that, there was another crucial question. That was, why did Li Chunfeng, Shang Guanyu, and even the mastermind of Southernwood House behind them observe him for more than 10 years instead of directly asking if he was that person? This illogical situation made Li Yunxin have another bold speculation. It was indeed possible that he was someone else. This someone else didn't refer to someone like Li Yunxin who had a strange fate and ended up in the wrong place. Instead, it referred to the other forces that Southernwood House and the others had included in their plans in advance. It was possible that the person who had been sent here wasn't the real crown prince they wanted, but the impersonator, who was also very dangerous to them. This speculation was very bold. But what he knew now was far beyond the scope of reasonable. If he didn't speculate more boldly, he was afraid that he would always be led by the nose. If he looked at things again with this speculation, it seemed that all the unreasonable things were clear. For example, why did Chen Zhao and the elders of Cloud Mountain all transmigrators, but the Southernwood House force that Chen Zhao left behind had become enemies with the elders? It was possible that they weren't very friendly in the other world. And now this Xie Sheng, if he really was the real crown prince, the key information he carried should be very useful to both sides. Therefore, although this guy was wary of the Freemasonry, he wasn't as fearful as Li Yunxin had been. He should also know that he had important information and that the Freemasonry wouldn't dare to do anything to him. This could also explain why the Freemasonry would always give Li Yunxin a chance of survival despite suppressing him in every possible way. So, what important information was it? In that short instant, thousands of thoughts flashed through Li Yunxin's mind. The surrounding scene seemed to be moving in slow motion in his eyes. Everything that Xie Sheng had done tonight had a huge impact on him. It had also opened a new door for him. The countless details that had been stored in his mind finally showed signs of being sorted out. That meant, it should be related to the calamity that the Freemasonry people were talking about. The Freemasonry elders used the calamity to brush off their subordinates. This statement wasn't baseless. It was just that they had packaged the truth in a different way. The so-called calamity should be referring to something else. Perhaps the key information that Xie Sheng had could help them resolve the calamity. As for what it was, perhaps he would only have an answer when he understood this world better. When he first came here, he thought that everything was very normal. It was just that there was a different power system. Now the more he understood, the stranger he felt. What was the so-called weak water? What was the celestial? Why did the Black Yama King die for no reason? Why were everyone, including mortals and cultivators, trapped in this vast midland? The Xiexing, was he the person that Mu Nanja really wanted? Xiexing would never have thought that after venting for more than 4 hours, Li Yunxin would understand so many questions. If he really knew, he would probably castrate himself out of regret. At this moment, he had already supported Wu Jiasong. Wu Jiasong didn't refuse and became like a puppet, allowing her to manipulate him. It was as if the mouthful of blood he had just spat out had spat out a lot of things. The two of them walked out. He's expression was the same as usual, as if nothing had happened. Wu Jiasong didn't say a word. Only when they got down from the deck and walked to the side of the ship did the man stop. He slowly withdrew his hand from He's arm and looked at her with a dull gaze. He seemed to be waiting for her to explain. He frowned and looked around. The night was dark and the sea was foggy. "I'm cold," she said. "Let's go back and talk." But Wu Jiasong didn't move. The man who cared for He so much was gone. He sighed. "All right." Chapter 6:14. After saying this, she was silent for a while and began to slowly tie her clothes again. Wu Jiasong's gaze fell on her right hand. It had recovered. In fact, he only wore a robe. She did not have time to wear the rest of her clothes and left them in Xiexing's room. The only thing she needed to tie was the belt of the robe. Usually, she only needed to move her fingers to tie these two small belts. However, at this time she pulled and pulled but couldn't tie it properly. He seemed to be thinking about something and hesitating about something. The fog on the sea was heavy. The two of them were silent for a while. Their hair, eyelashes, and beards were covered with a layer of water droplets. After a long time, he sighed again and finally said, "Now, I will tell you the truth. I have another identity that you have never known. You shouldn't have seen what happened tonight. But even if you saw it, there is nothing you can do. He and I did not know each other before. But I need to get something from him." Speaking of this, he raised her hand and touched Wu Jiasong's face. The man moved slightly as if he wanted to avoid it. However, his eyes were dull like a puppet. In the end, he didn't move. So He's fingers brushed Wu Jiasong's face like a dragonfly skimming the surface of the water. Then, she lowered her hand to fix his collar and whispered, "Thank you for taking care of me all these years. I owe you. When we reach the East Sea chain, you should get off the boat. I have to continue to the east. What I want to do, you will die if you get involved." After saying this, Wu Jiasong still didn't speak. He waited for a while, then sighed for the third time and was about to turn away. But she heard him whisper, "Did you find him or did he force you?" He was stunned he actually asked this. She shook her head. "Now that things have come to this, is it him or you?" Wu Jiasong interrupted her. He was silent for a while. "It's me." So Wu Jiasong's face slowly became lively as if the frost was thawing. He took a step back as if he wanted to see He's whole body. "Why don't I know? Of course, I know you have another identity. I know you have martial arts skills. When I bought you, you didn't explain your background clearly. I thought you were a Jianghu heroine." At this point, she smiled sadly. "It's my fault for reading too many romance novels. I even thought of stories for you." He thought to himself, "Perhaps you're a hero who offended your enemies and wanted to live in seclusion. Then you came to me. Since I like this story, I never asked you. I just thought that I have a lot of friends. If you have a calamity, I can also resolve it for you." As he said this in a low voice, his brows slowly furrowed. Why didn't I think about it? How could there be a heroine in a legendary novel? A woman walking in the pugilistic world, showing her face in public, mingling with a group of bandits, robbers, and people who fight fiercely and bravely. What kind of thing can she be? Ha! There are so many heroines like you. Those who didn't produce anything and didn't make any money, put it nicely, were wandering the Jianghu, but in fact, as long as they covered their faces, they were bandits who robbed others. There was no more money to rob. Once she opened her legs, she would become a prostitute. If she didn't do well, she would marry a bandit or go to a remote place to be a foreign woman. If she did well, she would have some reputation and become a heroine, but it's just, those girls in the brothel use their talent and beauty as a gimmick. You guys use your heroism as a gimmick? Marry someone like me, Jiasong, enough. Enough. When Wu Jiasong said these words, his tone became more and more rapid, and his voice became louder and louder. But he was very calm. Seeing his face turned red again, she interrupted him, "I've been with you for so many years. You know I don't have time to do those things. Don't be angry. You just vomited blood. You're not in good health. Wu Jiasong suddenly shouted loudly, I don't need your hypocrisy. His cry was heard by all the sailors on night watch. So they came over to see. Lu Baishui couldn't hide in the shadow and pretend nothing had happened. Therefore Li Yunxin saw him jump down from the second floor with a beautiful movement. He pretended that he had just walked over, stuck his head out from afar and shouted in a low voice, Who's there? What's going on? While talking he walked over slowly. Li Yunxin felt that Lu Baishui didn't really want to get involved, so he was dawdling. This guy was really smart, he knew where the water was deep and where the water was shallow. His name had the word water in it. A famous person once said, a small temple is full of demons and a shallow water is full of turtles. Now he felt that this sentence was very true. There were only 200 people but they had a lot of power. He regretted making this trip at this time. Wu Jiasong sneered, looked at Pan He and said loudly, Good. Someone is coming. Then he looked at Lu Baishui. What's going on? You want to know what's going on? Okay, let me tell you. His voice became louder and louder. At this moment, Xie Xing was still in the cabin. He closed the door, sat cross-legged on the side of the wooden bed that didn't collapse, and continued to cultivate as if nothing had happened. This guy must have entered the sage mode to vent his anger. It was a good time to suppress his inner demons and break through the realm. This method was the same as those cultivators who went on a killing spree in the mortal world, passed a fake tribulation, and then continued to cultivate. Li Yunxin sighed. He thought that almost all the bad guys in the world learned without a teacher when they did bad things. Only good people would work hard to learn. He had learned from Li Chunfeng and Shang Guanyu for more than 10 years, he could be considered a good person. But when Wu Jiasong shouted like that, Pan He looked at him pleadingly and whispered, Jiasong don't. Wu Jiasong also stared at her. His eyes were full of anger. But, looking at her he didn't know why but he suddenly felt that the anger in his heart was gone. It was still burning and it didn't go out. But now that he was weak and powerless from the burning, he suddenly didn't want to say a single word. He stared at her for a while, then turned his head and said loudly, Nothing. Nothing. Me and, he bit his words, something is wrong with this woman. Nothing. Lu Baishui wanted him to say nothing. Hearing this he coughed. Ah, that's good. The wind is strong on the sea, please go back to the cabin. Let's go back. So saying, he beckoned to the sailors on night watch who were walking over and walked away himself. But Li Yunxin could see clearly that Master Lu didn't really leave. He went to another place to hide from the wind and continued to listen. But the wind was strong and he was far away so he didn't know if he could hear clearly. This guy was also a worrywart. Thus, the man and the woman returned to their own world. Wu Jiasong looked at Pan He and sneered, You told me not to. You know this kind of thing is not to be said. Pan He shook her head. Jiasong, Wu Jiasong continued to sneer, Since you know shame you still dare to do it. All these years you, Pan He interrupted him, Jiasong. I don't want to kill you. You don't want to, Wu Jiasong was stunned. What? Pan He shook her head gently. She wrapped her robe and squinted at the fog on the sea. You don't know who I am. You are not afraid of Jianghu people and you look down on heroes. Well then let me ask you, are you afraid of cultivators? Wu Jiasong continued to be stunned. Cultivators? I work for those cultivators. We can be considered to be their lackeys. But it's not an ordinary Jianghu gang. Jianghu gangs work for their own selfish interests. But what we want to do is related to the world. When Pan He said this, her voice was light and calm in sharp contrast with the man in front of her. She looked back at him. What I just did is hard for any ordinary person to accept, I know. But I'm not an ordinary person. Don't ask me what I want to do. If you know this, leave quickly. Her calm tone and solemn words finally made Wu Jiasong slowly calm down. There was still terrible anger, resentment, and grievance in his heart. However, he was not an impulsive teenager and he had some understanding of Pan He. Therefore he knew what she said might be true. He stared at her in confusion. What are you talking about? I don't understand. I don't understand. He raised his hand and pointed to the distance as if he was pointing to their home on land and asked her, Am I not good to you? Do we lack money? Why do you still want to do these things? Pan He finally smiled sadly, You are good to me. We don't lack money. But before you bought me I was already doing these things. If I could choose, how would I end up like this? Wu Jiasong was stunned. Then he suddenly took 2 steps forward and held Pan He in his arms. In a low and quick voice as if he was afraid that someone would hear, he said, "That's good, that's good. I forgive you. You can choose now and don't do those things anymore, okay? Let's get off the ship when we reach the East Sea chain, okay?" Pan-hee did not break free. Her face was pressed against Wu Jiasong's chest, but she was still very calm. Her voice was also very calm, very cold. "Jiasong, you can't choose. Go." His body froze. The two of them hugged like this in the sea breeze for a while, and Pan-hee slowly broke free. Wu Jiasong was stunned. He gritted his teeth and said in a low voice, "What happened, to make you like this? Who is that Taoist priest? If you want me to go, you should at least let me know the reason." Pan-hee did not say anything and turned to leave. Wu Jiasong grabbed her hand, holding it very tightly. But Pan-hee also turned her wrist, and with a little force she caught his hand and threw it to the side. Wu Jiasong did not give up and continued to grab her. She moved sideways to avoid, but Wu Jiasong hugged her waist. "If you don't tell me, I won't go. I, Wu Jiasong, have always been a person who knows what is right and wrong. This kind of thing happened and you ask me not to know. Then just kill me here." Pan-hee stopped, her face was still very calm. But suddenly 2 lines of tears rolled down as if the tears were dripped on her face by someone else, and not her own tears. "Why do you have to do this? Even if you know, what can you do?" But Wu Jiasong did not see her tears and only said with hatred, "I don't care." Pan-hee turned her back to him and said, "Okay. Then I will tell you so that you can leave clearly. I am a member of the Freemasons. I am the person in charge of the Eastern Sea country of the Freemasons. That Daoist Xie has a great secret, an even more frightening ability. I went to find him to tell him these things and tell him to go to the Dragon Island. If I do this, I will have a great merit. Maybe I can get promoted and I won't have to do things like this anymore. If we go to the east, we will encounter all kinds of demons and cultivators. Every one of them is very powerful. I can only rely on Daoist Xie to protect me, save my life, and live to accomplish those things. He is a human after all, he has desires. Because of my body, he will casually pull me for a while. I know I am not smart, but I have a strong will. Right now, my body can still be used. After a few more years, I will become old and weak and I won't even be able to use this body. If I still stay in this position, I will die a terrible death sooner or later. I am grateful to you for taking care of me for so many years and letting me live a good life. So I feel sorry for you and want to ask you to leave. But you," when she said this, tears rolled down her face more quickly. However, his hands, which were hanging by his sides, suddenly tightened. "But you, why do you have to ask? Why do you want me to kill you?" As soon as she said this, she suddenly slammed her palms backwards. How could Wu Jiasong expect her to kill him like this? When he heard Pan-hee's words, the hands that were originally hugging her in a fit of pique slowly loosened, as if he couldn't bear to do it. Then he took the 2 palms solidly. With a bang, he was sent flying and fell 2 or 3 steps away. He landed on the deck and wanted to get up. But he only tilted his head to look at Pan-hee, and then spat out a mouthful of blood and fainted. Pan-hee stood there for a while, then raised her hand to wipe her face and slowly turned around. At this time her tears were gone, and her face was as calm as water. She walked 3 steps to Wu Jiasong and without hesitation, raised her hand again and was about to strike his head. But at this time, she heard someone say, "If you hit him, he will really die. It doesn't matter if he dies." These 3 sentences made Pan-hee's body suddenly tense up, and she immediately retreated 2 steps, retracting her palms in front of her. Then she saw that there was a man sitting on the ship's railing, dressed in white, looking at her with interest as if he was watching a play. In the future, when you think about the past, you will probably find that no one treated you as well as he did. Won't you regret it to death? After saying this, he thought about it again. Then he repeated with certainty, "Yes, that's what happened." Pan-hee frowned. The man sitting on the ship's railing looked like a middle-aged man. He had a beard, but it wasn't long, and it was neatly trimmed on his chin, which made him look somewhat rough and refined. He could be considered handsome. If there were no crow's feet at the corner of his eyes, he could even be considered handsome. His figure was between burly and thin, and it was the kind of middle-aged man who was sturdy but not fat. The most special thing about him was his eyes. The color of his pupils was very light. It was light blue. There was a strange feeling. Pan-hee had never seen this person on the ship. Chapter 6:15. She subconsciously turned her head to look at the ship's deck. But there was no reaction from Xie Xing, as if he did not notice the existence of this person. So she slowly took a step back and asked cautiously, "Who are you?" She wanted to ask, "Who are you?" or "What are you?" On such a night, such a man appeared. He looked like a typical person from the Central Plains, but he had blue eyes. He was obviously not a human. He faintly felt that she had experienced the power of an inhuman. But just like the thought that flashed in her mind when she saw Xie Sheng, she still could not remember when she had that kind of experience. But the man did not answer her. He just shook his head slightly and continued with interest, "You are a strange woman. I saw you crying. On the one hand you are reluctant to let him go, but on the other hand you want to kill him. Are all women in the world like you, saying one thing and doing another?" He frowned, not knowing how to answer him. It was fine if he was a human. But if he was a demon, it was said that demons were eccentric. Like this man in front of her, he might be asking politely now, but he might show his fangs the next moment. And from his words, it seemed that he had been hurt by a woman and had a grudge against her. I had no choice. She thought about it again and again, but she could not find a way out, so she said in a low voice, "I will repay him by doing anything in my next life." Next life? The man snorted as if he did not care about her answer. "Only mortals like you believe in the next life." After saying this, he finally jumped down from the side of the ship. And at this time, he also noticed a detail. When he landed, his left foot was a little lame, and his brows were slightly wrinkled. It seemed that he was injured recently. As soon as he landed, he looked behind He said loudly, "Brother Lu, come out and meet me." At this time, Li Yunxin straightened his body in the clouds. There were only 3 golden beans left in his hand. He did not eat any more, turned his palm over and withdrew it. After a slight hesitation, he stood up again. So the chair under him disappeared. Then he stared at the new person for a while, frowning slightly. In his eyes, this fellow was also a mortal. This meant that he couldn't see through his cultivation level. Perhaps he was only slightly weaker than him, or on par with him, or stronger than him. The third possibility was extremely low. In terms of individual strength, the existence of Long Sun, who was stronger than Shi Yi's mysterious realm, could be considered to be as rare as phoenix feathers and qilin horns. He couldn't see the person's face clearly. In fact, if one were to look at him from 10 steps away, they would only be able to see a translucent, faintly glowing silhouette, just like Li Yunxin. This was some kind of brilliant invisibility technique that could hide one's spirit, energy, and spirit. However, Li Yunxin could sense the changes in the spiritual energy in the sea. Although the qi of heaven and earth was in chaos now, a powerful person would still cause slight disturbances when he or she passed by. It was hard to tell by himself, but now he had too many treasures in his hands. With the help of a Dharma treasure, he could see everything clearly. Just like when he saw the Lord Shinryu in the painting on his fan, he could see it now. This person's qi was inextricably linked with the qi of heaven and earth, very similar to the appearance of the Lord Shinryu in the city of Wei. At that time, when the city of Wei was burned, he had already taken over. The Lord Shinryu came from the sky, and on his fan, there was a painting drawn with the power of millions of spirits, faithfully projecting the mountains and rivers near the city of Wei into the painting. The real qi of heaven and earth could only be seen from the painting, and some other things could be seen. From this, he found that the Lord Shinryu had a golden core. Countless rays of golden light spread out from the core in all directions, almost forming a close connection with the mountains, rivers, and plants in the painting. It seems to have fused with nature and the spiritual qi of this world. It was an inseparable part of the background of this world. The scene at that time gave Li Yunxin a great shock. From what he knew, it seemed that if he wanted to destroy the Lord Shinryu, he had to destroy the world first. She was bound to the world. After that, he naturally went to see the Dragon Son and also himself. He wanted to see if the Dragon Son, who was assigned to various places by the Lord Shinryu, had a similar performance, but it didn't exist. He used to think that this kind of situation only appeared on the Supreme Dragon God, but now, he found that this uninvited guest also had it on him. In Li Yunxin's eyes, he was just a silhouette. But if he looked carefully at the Dharma treasure in his hand, he would see that there were countless extremely thin, extremely faint rays of light, connected with the sea and the world. The Dharma treasure was, after all, not as detailed as the Dharma treasure that he drew himself. But he also knew, this person's situation was the same as the Lord Shinryu. He was the world and the world was him, then he should be. Li Yunxin's face turned ugly. When he was on land, Lu Baishui told him about the rumors along the coast. He said that the Dragon King inland were all inferior Dragon King, and the Dragon King of the sea, the ocean was more than 10 times larger than the inland, and the number of living creatures in the ocean was more than 1,000,000 times larger than the inland, was the true Dragon King. At that time, Li Yunxin only smiled. After the Battle of Cloud Mountain, the demons of the world followed Dragon Sun's lead. When did they hear about the Dragon King of the sea? Even if the demons lived deep in the mountains and were ignorant, and the people and demons of this era had no interest in the sea. But these Dragon Sun were created from the dragon soul of the Shinryu. There were already 9 of them, how could there be another 9? But now he saw that this person was similar to the Shinryu. This is the East Sea Dragon King that Lu Baishui mentioned. Oh. He had already been a fake crown prince. If he found out that the dragon body that he had worked so hard to get was actually a fake Dragon King, he would probably explode. At this time he heard this uninvited guest call out to Lu Baishui. When Lu Baishui hid himself, he could only hide from Pan He and Xie Xing. Now that this person appeared on the ship, he could see through him at a glance. From his tone, it seemed that he was familiar with Lu Baishui. Li Yunxin frowned and looked at Lu Baishui's figure on the ship, his face slightly dark. When that person spoke, only Pan He, Lu Baishui and Wu Jiasong could hear him, and the rest of the people on the ship were isolated. Now that he was standing on the cloud, he could only see. This person seemed to be equally powerful. Li Yunxin didn't know if this person knew who he was, but he didn't want to expose himself. But Lu Baishui knew. Previously, when Xie Xing asked him, he didn't say anything. Now, from the tone of this person, it seemed that they were old acquaintances. Li Yunxin didn't know if this person would say anything this time. So his eyes became colder, and he saw Lu Baishui come out of his hiding place. Chapter 6:16. But Lu Baishui's expression was a bit strange. As if he recognized this person but didn't expect to see him here. Thus, he was somewhat puzzled and his footsteps were slightly hesitant. Seeing him like this, the man laughed again. "Brother Lu, don't you recognize me?" Lu Baishui frowned and walked another 10 steps. When he could see the man's face clearly, he said, "Mr. Shueiyue, why are you here?" This Mr. Shueiyue put his hands behind his back and sighed. "I heard that it's not peaceful here. I was afraid that something would happen to you, so I came to have a look. I didn't expect to see such a good show. Brother Lu, is there anyone on this ship that is giving you a hard time?" Lu Baishui walked forward a few steps and stopped. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked at this Mr. Shueiyue for a while and said, "When we met, you said you were a hermit from Hun Sea. Because your ancestors were tired of the conflicts on the land, they hid in the East Sea. But now..." Mr. Shueiyue was silent for a while and looked around. "Brother Lu, when I became friends with you, I said that I didn't remember how long I had lived. You are a smart person, don't you know that I am not a human but a god? Why are you asking me this again today?" He smiled. "It seems that I came to the right place. Is it because someone on this ship is threatening you and you don't dare to tell the truth?" Lu Baishui glanced at the deck. Mr. Shueiyue smiled and shook his head. "Brother Lu, do you want to say it's him?" "I don't think so. It's just a young Taoist. There are many of them on the land. Such a person wouldn't give you a hard time. I think it's someone else." Then he said loudly, "Friends on the ship, why don't you come out and greet me? My friends are here, but you also have friends on my ship." Hearing this, Lu Baishui was surprised. Then he frowned. "Mr. Shueiyue, are you working for the East Sea Dragon King?" This Mr. Shueiyue had known him for about 10 years. But the relationship between humans and gods was different from the relationship between mortals. In the past 10 years they had only met 4 or 5 times. Each time was a long time for Lu Baishui. But for Mr. Shueiyue it was like yesterday. Lu Baishui was indeed a smart person. How could he not know that Shueiyue was not a human? But when he was dealing with the demons on land, he already knew that if a demon disguised as a mortal and came into contact with humans, it was best not to expose him. If they understood each other, they could be friends. If he made it clear, most of the fiendish demons would find it boring, and some would even turn hostile. But now Shueiyue had said. And now Shueiyue suddenly appeared on the ship and said such words. Thinking back to the things he had done when the two of them were acquainted, although he was a mortal and did not know much about the inside story of Li Yunxin's trip, he gradually figured out the truth in his mind after hearing the words of goddess Penglai who possessed Li Si in Whitewater Town and seeing a lot on the boat. Only now did she realize that when Shueiyue Mr. said, "You also have friends at my place," perhaps she was referring to that Shangguanyu. This inhuman friend of his was probably also a sea demon working for the Dragon King of the Eastern Sea. But disregarding all other factors, just one thing If the person Shuiwe Mr. was referring to was really the mother of his equally mysterious brother Li, Lu Baishui himself did not like this kind of method. Maybe because he had never enjoyed the love of a father and a mother, he didn't like it. Therefore when he said this, Shuiwe's pair of light blue eyes slightly brightened, the smile on her face also gradually faded. He looked at Lu Baishui and said, "Oh? Brother Lu, you are not being threatened. You made a new friend and forgot about me?" There was fog on the sea. After Shuiwe appeared, the fog became thicker. As soon as he said this, the thick fog suddenly rolled up, and waves rose on the surface of the sea. That was not an ordinary wave. Lu Baishui first felt his feet sink. It was as if his body suddenly became heavy, pressing on the deck. Then he realized that he was not pressing on the deck, but the deck was pushing against his feet. The whole ship was suddenly lifted up. People always used the phrase "a drop in the ocean" to describe a ship sailing on the sea. At this time, this phrase became appropriate. It was as if the ship broke through the fog. Lu Baishui suddenly saw a sea of clouds. However, this sea of clouds was the fog that shrouded the surface of the sea. A gigantic wave of unknown height lifted the Tao high into the sky, but it was not a wave as steep as a lone peak when General Fubo appeared, but a wave as gentle as a mountain. This meant that this wave was hundreds of feet high and how wide it was. But looking further away, there were still countless waves rising and falling on the vast sea fog. It was as if the East Sea was originally just a basin of water, and the waves were just gentle ripples caused by a gentle breeze on the surface of the sea. But now there was a pair of giant hands in the water, stirring it violently. Even a person like Lu Baishui couldn't stand steadily after feeling the huge force from the soles of his feet, and swayed left and right 2 or 3 steps before regaining his footing. The people in the cabin were all awakened, and didn't know what was going on. But when he adjusted his breath and was about to speak again, suddenly he felt the momentum of the ship stop. The waves above the sea of clouds in the distance and even the waves below the ship suddenly disappeared. He was shocked and knew that the huge waves had thrown the ship to the apex, and the momentum had decreased. The waves retreated, but the ship was still rising. At this time, the ship was already some distance from the sea. He only had time to reach out to the side of the ship, and then he felt all the internal organs in his body being thrown up, and he couldn't stand on anything. He was falling in the air, and then there was a loud bang and the seawater splashed on the deck. He hit the ship hard as if he had fallen from a height of several feet. A terrible groan came from the hull of the ship. Lu Baishui didn't know if the keel could withstand such an impact. If it couldn't, the lives of all the people on the ship would be gone. He looked to the side and his heart sank. He saw a broken plank and a mainmast on the raging waves. There was fog on the sea and he couldn't see where the Haitsong was. But according to the wave just now, the Haitsong was on the top of the wave and the Haitsong was on the slope. Faced with such a terrifying wave, the Haitsong had most likely capsized. At this time, the roar of the waves was like thunder in the sky, covering the screams of the people on the ship. Xiexing finally felt something was wrong, and he poked his head out of the cabin. But Mr. Shuiwe, who was standing steadily, snapped his fingers, and the cabin door closed with a bang, knocking him back. It was strange. Although there were loud noises around him, he could hear everything clearly within 10 steps of him. At this time, Lu Baishui stood up from the ground, and saw Pan He pulling Wu Jiasong's unconscious body to the side of the ship. Mr. Shuiwe smiled coldly, "Brother Lu. If you were threatened because you were afraid of that person's supernatural power, let's see if he dares to come out today." Then he looked around and shouted, "Friends on land, why don't you show yourself?" At this time the sea wind was roaring and the waves were roaring. The Haitsong was like a small boat in the wind, and it could capsize at any time. Mr. Shuiwe still had a faint smile on his face, but it was getting colder, and the light on his body was getting brighter. He looked more and more like a powerful god of the sea. Every move he made could change the sea and the sky. Lu Baishui knew the situation was not good. He wasn't afraid of death. But there were still many brothers on the ship. If so many people had died because of his promise and friendship to someone else, what would they have done to deserve it? So he steadied himself in the storm and called out loudly, "Mr. Shuiwe, you and I have been friends for 10 years. Are you really going to bury all of us tonight?" Mr. Shuiwe smiled slightly. "That depends on whether that friend of yours is willing to show up and settle the accounts." Lu Baishui was stunned. Accounts? But when he said this, he suddenly found that the world suddenly became quiet. It was as if the raging waves and raging winds of the world were just a background. Now, just after he said this word, someone suddenly removed the background and replaced it with another one. In the blink of an eye, the thick fog on the surface of the sea dissipated completely, revealing a bright moon on the horizon. The waves also disappeared. Not only did they disappear, but the sea was as calm as a mirror, without a trace of a wave, like a pool of stagnant water. But the most amazing thing was, Lu Baishui could still feel the wind blowing on his face. The sails were still swollen and the ship was still moving quickly. Mr. Shueihua was stunned. It seemed that he was also surprised by such a drastic change. He abruptly looked around, but he didn't see or sense anything. As for Lu Baishui, he opened his eyes wide in disbelief, not knowing what to think or say. He knew that Li Yunxin was not an ordinary person. He also knew that Li Yunxin had some magical powers. But he didn't know that his magical powers were so powerful. It was so powerful that it could suppress the raging waves of the sea in an instant. Mr. Shueihua didn't seem to be the Mr. Shueihua he knew. Li Yunxin was also not the Li Yunxin he knew. Then he heard a clear voice coming from the sky. "Brother Lu, your Mr. Shueihua is not working for the Dragon King of the East Sea. In my opinion, he is the Dragon King of the East Sea." Lu Baishui followed the voice and looked up. He saw that Li Yunxin had already reverted to her original handsome appearance. She stepped on the void and walked down from the sky. There was a hazy light on his body, just like the light on Mr. Shueihua's body, which made him look like a dream, like a god. Chapter 617. Lu Baishui didn't know if it was an illusion, but with every step he took, he felt his body shake slightly. It was as if there was an invisible giant foot following his steps, stepping on the surface of the sea again and again, causing the raging waves to be unable to stir even half a bit. Lu Baishui realized, this was a real fight between immortals and it was not something he could participate in. With great shock, he slowly retreated to the side. He really didn't know what to say or do. 10 days ago he was drinking and having fun with him in the inn, but now he was like a god. Under such circumstances, if a mortal didn't immediately kneel down and worship him, it would be a miracle. Mr. Shueihua didn't stop him. In fact, although this master of the sea still had a smile on his face, his eyebrows were already furrowed imperceptibly. The clear light on his body was jumping, like the internal energy of a martial arts master. If the divine power of a god could be calculated using internal energy, then in Lu Baishui's view, this Mr. Shueihua seemed to have mobilized all the divine power in his body to fight against some kind of power. But he didn't seem to gain any advantage and was even at a slight disadvantage. When Li Yunxin finally walked to the deck, the clear light on Mr. Shueihua's body had already become as bright as a flame. "You want to settle accounts with me?" Li Yunxin raised his hand and pressed down. It seemed to be a very casual movement, but also like he was brushing away something. "Tell me what accounts?" There was a crisp cracking sound. Cracks appeared on the deck. And the center of those radial cracks was right under Mr. Shueihua's feet. He stopped smiling and his expression became a little strange. But Lu Baishui couldn't tell what was strange. He only felt that his chest was stuffy. Before, when Mr. Shueihua was angry, he raised incredible waves on the surface of the sea, and the momentum was extremely terrifying. But now, those waves were calmed by Li Yunxin and became extremely quiet. And now this silence had reached a certain extreme. It was as if the entire sea was imprisoned and was getting tighter and tighter. The sea breeze stopped, and the surface of the sea was like a mirror. Now even the air was horribly stuffy. Even with Lu Baishui's cultivation, he had to use a bit of effort to open his mouth to breathe. What was even stranger was that in his ears, he began to hear the sound of his own blood flowing and his heartbeat. When he realized this, he was shocked. He realized that there was no sound at all, other than the sound of Li Yunxin and Shueiyu talking and the sound of the deck breaking. His voice was suppressed by some kind of power. What kind of terrifying and mystical power was this? Lu Baishui gasped. He started to think about the days he spent with Li Yunxin. What kind of person was he with? Mr. Shueihua also seemed to be straining. But he was still much better than Lu Baishui. He took a step forward. There were ripples on the surface of the sea, and the air seemed to relax a little. But this step was like fanning the air in a closed room. After taking a breather for a while, he suppressed it again, and with a buzzing sound, the entire ship sank again. It was just that he had sunk because he had been thrown onto the waves. Now that he was sinking, it was like loose soil being compacted. The surface of the sea was pressed down. As a result, even more fine cracks appeared under his feet, and his expression became increasingly strange. Even his voice changed as if his entire body was suffocating in the water. Your friend, these days he has swallowed the demon generals under my command, the whale sharks of the sea. It wasn't easy for him to attain the Tao, but he killed nearly 100 of them. Today he fought with me, but he was so stubborn. He even dared to hurt me. Now he has been captured and imprisoned by me. How do you want to settle this debt with the East Sea tribe? His words were smooth, but his voice became more and more dull. By the last few words, his voice was so low that it was unclear. At this time, Lu Baishui realized why Mr. Shueyue's expression was strange. His face and his body seemed to be melting. His eyebrows, eyes, nose, and mouth slowly drooped. As he spoke, he walked towards Li Yunxin. But with every step he took, his body sank a little. When he finished speaking, he was like a melting sugar doll. Even his legs were bent. Li Yunxin only sneered, "So you are here to interrogate me? What a coincidence. I also have something to ask you." East Sea Dragon King. With every word Li Yunxin said, the person in front of him became more distorted and abstract. "Is Shangguanyu with you?" The visitor's body suddenly froze. Although his face had already melted into a ball, one could still see the surprise on his face. "You," but he couldn't say anything more. His body finally couldn't bear the terrible pressure, and with a boom he turned into countless flowing lights. Those flowing lights should have dissipated, but at the moment of disintegration, an iron chain suddenly appeared in Li Yunxin's palm. He swung it at the flowing lights and locked them all. Lu Baishui was shocked. "Brother Li?" Li Yunxin didn't look at him. He turned his left hand again and took out a piece of magic paper. He wiped it on the iron chain. It seemed that all the light spots on the chain were wiped into the paper. Then he glanced at Lu Baishui and said lazily, "Brother Lu, are you worried?" "Don't worry, it's just the incarnation of the East Sea Dragon King. It's just that he probably didn't expect that his incarnation wouldn't be able to leave after coming here. He must be beating his chest and stamping his feet in Mao Penglai, and is so angry that he wants to beat someone up." Saying this, he squinted at Lu Baishui. "Maybe he also hates you. I guess you can't be friends anymore." "Ah." He shook his head and sighed. "What a fragile friendship." Lu Baishui was stunned. "I didn't mean," Li Yunxin waved his hand and drawled, "Well, Brother Lu, I am not a narrow-minded person. If you can't be friends with him, you can be friends with me. You and I are friends, tell me about it. How did you get to know this Mr. Shueyue? What does he ask you to do?" Lu Baishui was stunned. Only then did he realize that the sea had started to ripple again. The sound of the wind could be heard, and his breathing was no longer suppressed. But after hearing Li Yunxin's words, he felt more depressed. He looked at Li Yunxin for a while without fear and then slowly stepped back. "Brother Li, are you going to interrogate me?" Li Yunxin laughed. "Interrogate? Brother Lu, your friend from the East Sea sank the Height Song. He almost fed you guys to the fish. But I turned the tide, and saved you guys. Now I am interrogating the person who wanted to kill you 2 ships. How can it be called an interrogation? Or Brother Lu has some secrets that you can't tell me?" After saying this, the smile on Li Yunxin's face disappeared. He looked at Lu Baishui coldly for a while. But Lu Baishui heaved a sigh and looked at him seriously. "I only knew he was Mr. Shueyue. I didn't know he was the Dragon King of the East Sea. And I didn't know Ling Xi was with him. Just like you were Lu Hao Baishui before." Li Yunxin sneered. "Not the Sea King Lu Fei? Brother Li used to be a Jianghu hero, but then you became a cultivator. And then you became a godlike figure today." Lu Baishui sighed. "Are we still going to bicker like this?" "Okay. No bickering. Then tell me, how many things are you hiding from me?" Li Yunxin sneered. He waved his hand and a table suddenly appeared in front of him. He spread the magic paper on the table, and a magic brush appeared in his hand. "Now the sky is clear and the moon is bright. Brother Lu, take your time and I will listen to you. Then I will finish this painting. It will be a wonderful thing." Lu Baishui's eyes subconsciously fell on the table in front of Li Yunxin. After seeing the miraculous scene just now, he was not too surprised to see Li Yunxin make a table out of thin air. But when he looked at the paper again, he couldn't help but be surprised. There was a painting on the paper. The painting was simple. It was the sea. It was drawn in a way that Lu Baishui had never seen before. It seemed to be just a few strokes with a brush dipped in color. But when Lu Baishui looked at it, he felt that the paper was full of raging waves. It was even more frightening than when the towel was thrown into the sky by a huge wave. It was as if the vast sea that they lived in was really sealed in the paper by a few strokes, and it would violently overflow at any time. Seeing the black light and raging waves with their own eyes didn't make people afraid. That was because even the terrifying waves were still within reason, just more violent and intense. But the scene now was something that no mortal had ever experienced, not to mention mortals. Even in the cultivation world in the past 1,000 years, also, no one would ever witness a profound realm Taoist painting a spirit map that seemed to be able to seal the chi of the entire world into it. If someone who knew a little about this, such as Xian Shilio, saw what Li Yunxin did, he would be 10,000 times more surprised than Lu Baishui. In the past, when the chi of the world was not chaotic, it was extremely difficult to draw such a vast world into a painting. Even a profound painting Taoist in the mysterious realm might not be able to do it. Not to mention that the chi of the world had been messed up by Li Yunxin today. How could he do it? Of course Lu Baishui didn't know any of this. But it didn't stop this hero of the sea who didn't show any fear even when the two big monsters were fighting. He gasped and took 3 steps back before he could stabilize himself. It was just that he glanced at it. He felt as if an endless amount of seawater was pressing down on him, and he was at the bottom of the sea thousands of meters, tens of thousands of meters deep. It was dark and gloomy, and he could be trapped there forever at any time, unable to escape. He gasped for breath. It was as if he had survived a disaster, just because of that glance. Seeing him like this, Li Yunxin smiled slightly. Humph. Brother Lu, it's rare for you to have a firm mind. It's lucky that mortals dare to look at my spiritual map and don't think that they are stupid. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.